The year was 1879, and the season was autumn. The air at the Laramie transfer station was sharp with the taste of coal smoke and the coming winter. It was not yet morning, but the platform bustled under the yellow gas lamps. Steam from the great black engine hissed into the cold, mixing with the shouts of conductors and the babble of men seeking fortunes in the Wyoming Territory. Soldiers in worn blue, miners with the dust of the hills ground into their faces, speculators in cheap suits, and women whose laughter was too loud for the early hour. They were all souls in transit, moving along the new iron veins of the nation. Chaska stood apart from the crowd, a still point in the chaos. He was a man in his late 20s, built with a lean strength that spoke of open plains, not city streets. His black hair was long, tied back with a simple leather thong. He wore canvas trousers and a flannel shirt, things bought from a white man's store, but they sat on him like a costume. Beneath his jacket, he carried the only two things that mattered. Tucked in his belt was a knife, its handle worn smooth by his grandfather's hand. In a deerskin pouch that never left his side, he carried the ashes of his younger brother. His journey was supposed to take him north, back to the grasslands where his brother could be given to the wind, back to the people. He had waited for the northbound connection for 2 days. A conductor, his voice rough with authority, bellowed a final call. Northbound for Sheridan and the Powder River, all aboard. As Chaska moved toward the call, a young black woman struggling with a baby in a heavy valise stumbled in front of him. The baby wailed, a thin, desperate sound. The valise popped open, spilling modest possessions onto the filthy platform. The woman began to cry. The conductor shouted again, impatient. Chaska stopped. He said nothing, simply bent and gathered the scattered items. He repacked the valise, closed the clasp with one strong twist, and handed it to her. He then took the swaddled baby from her arms. The child, surprised, went quiet. He held the baby while the woman, weeping her thanks, climbed the steps of the northbound car. He handed the child up to her, touched the brim of his hat, and stepped back. Cheyenne Express, final call, this train departing, another voice roared from the track beside him. The engine for Cheyenne let out a percussive blast of steam. Chaska, turning from the northbound train, found his path blocked by a baggage cart. To get out of the way, he stepped up onto the nearest car, the one bound for Cheyenne. He intended only to pass through the carriage, to cross to the platform on the other side and get to his correct train. He had one foot in the aisle when the train lurched. A violent, metallic scream, and the coupling snapped taut. The train was moving. It was moving east, to Cheyenne, not north. Chaska stood frozen in the doorway for a beat. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had made a simple, stupid mistake. He was on the wrong train. He turned, but the platform was already sliding away into the pre-dawn gloom. He was trapped. With a quiet curse, he moved into the car, found an empty space by the door, and leaned against the wood, his face settling into the stoic mask he had learned to wear. The ashes in his pouch felt heavy, a promise delayed by his own decent impulse. Further down the same car, Nora Whitfield sat bolt upright. She had not slept, she had prayed, and she had watched the strange, rough landscape pass by in the dark. And she had clutched the letter in her gloved hand until the paper was limp. She was 19 years old. She had come all the way from Boston, a city of brick and fog, to this land of terrifying emptiness. She was a mail-order bride. The word still tasted strange to her, like something cheap and desperate. But she was desperate. Poverty in Boston had been a slow, gray drowning. After her father died, there was nothing but this. The advertisement in the newspaper, and then the letters. Her intended, a Mr. Abram Reed, owned a mercantile in Cheyenne. His letters were steady, proper, and respectful. He spoke of building a good life, of needing a partner. He had agreed to her one condition, that after her duties were established, She might be permitted to start a small class for the town's children. Nora was educated. She could read and write and do sums, and this knowledge was her only true possession. She believed in the power of words, and she believed in the sanctity of a promise. This marriage was her escape, her one chance to build a decent life, to have a home. She was a virgin, and she would give herself to this man, this stranger, with the same determined resolve she had used to survive. Her honor, she felt, was balanced on the head of a pin. She must arrive on time. She must be met by Mr. Reed. She must follow the path she had chosen. There was no other. The train, which had been gathering speed, suddenly let out a deafening shriek of its brakes. The sound was not a warning. It was a crisis. The entire carriage jolted with a force that threw luggage from the racks and people from their seats. Nora, lost in her thoughts and light from lack of food, was pitched forward out of her seat. She gave a small, breathless cry as she tumbled into the aisle, her hands outstretched. She was going to strike the floor, hard. She never hit it. Chaska, standing by the door, had braced himself instinctively. He saw the girl fly forward. He moved without thinking, one long stride, and caught her. His arms closed around her waist. She was feather-light but solid, a warm, real thing in the chaos. Nora's bonnet was knocked askew, and her face was inches from his. She stared up at him, her eyes a shocking, terrified blue. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and deep. For a full second, the entire car, with its smells of unwashed bodies, tobacco, and coal, ceased to exist. There was only the jolt of the train and the strange, intimate silence between two people from different worlds, holding on to each other. The carriage was full of groans and curses. Passengers were picking themselves up. Chaska felt the girl tremble. He set her gently back on her feet. "My apologies," she whispered, her voice reedy, her face pale as she fumbled with her bonnet. "The brake. I did not—" "It was not your fault," Chaska said. His voice was low, with a slight gravel to it. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow as the train shimmied to a stop. "Are you injured?" "No, thank you, sir." She pulled her elbow away, not from rudeness, but from a sudden, sharp awareness of his hand, his dark skin against her sleeve. She retreated to her seat, her cheeks suddenly burning. The whispers started almost immediately. The other passengers had seen. They saw a proper white woman, a lady by her dress, held by an Indian. The car was a cross-section of the territory's prejudices. Men in bowler hats muttered to their wives. A woman fanned herself, though the air was cool. A man in a severe black suit, a deacon's collar tight at his throat, watched Nora resettle herself. Deacon Abel. His eyes were small and judgmental. He looked at Nora not as a person, but as a problem. She was another piece of Eastern weakness, a soul to be scoured and saved, a potential vessel of sin to be brought under his stern guidance. From the other end of the car, another man watched Chaska. This man was slumped in his seat, his boots propped up, his hat pulled low. Walt Kearney. He was a man who lived by the gun, his loyalty sold to the highest bidder. He looked at Chaska with a hunter's casual assessment. He saw the knife, the straight back, the lack of fear. He saw a target. Chaska ignored them all. He stood by the window, watching the landscape. It was flat and brown, the sky a vast, empty bowl. The twin steel tracks gleamed in the first gray light of morning. They ran parallel, two lines that would never meet, cutting a wound through a land that had once been open. He thought of his brother and the irony of his situation. He was a Lakota, once a scout for the army until he saw what they were doing. Now a man belonging nowhere. He was on a train, a symbol of the very change that had destroyed his family, and it was taking him in the wrong direction. He remembered the words of an elder, spoken long ago in a winter lodge. "The wind speaks, if you know how to listen." It carries the dust of your ancestors and the promises of your children. Here, the wind just rattled the glass, carrying the smell of coal. Nora clutched her reticule. She would not look at the man who had caught her. She focused on her goal. Cheyenne, Mr. Abram Reed, honor. She just had to hold on for a few more hours. The train began to move again, slowly this time. The conductor, a portly man with a red face, bustled through, checking tickets and calming passengers. Just a small delay, folks. A rock on the line. We will be in Cheyenne by 10 o'clock. Deacon Abel decided this was his moment. He stood, bracing himself against the sway of the car. He was a large man, and he filled the aisle. "Friends, sinners," he boomed. "Let us use this moment of deliverance from peril to consider our mortal souls." As he reached into his frock coat, perhaps for a Bible, a thick, cream-colored envelope slipped from his pocket. It fell to the floor of the aisle and landed by his boot. Chaska saw it. His eyes were sharp, trained to notice small details. He saw the red wax seal. It was an intricate design, a stylized letter C. Around the edge, he could just make out the words Crowley Water Rights Registry. Before the deacon noticed, a young man with wire-rimmed spectacles seated nearby leaned into the aisle. He did not touch the envelope. He simply observed it, his eyes bright with intelligence. He then pulled a small, worn notebook from his pocket and scribbled a few words. Elias Grant. He looked less like a passenger and more like a collector of facts. Deacon Abel, realizing his loss, flushed a deep red. He snatched the envelope from the floor and shoved it deep into his pocket. His eyes darting around, he glared at Elias, who was already looking out the window, and at Chaska, who met his gaze with perfect stillness. Walt Kearney, who had seen the entire exchange, let out a low chuckle. He stood up, stretched his long arms, and sauntered down the aisle. He did not look at the deacon or the reporter. His eyes were fixed on Chaska, and then, for a long, unsettling moment, on Nora. His was a gaze that stripped and possessed. He reached the end of the car and, with a final, predatory look back, he slammed the connecting door. The heavy sound echoed through the carriage like a gunshot. The train whistle screamed its arrival, a long, mournful sound that cut through the flat. Gray sky, Cheyenne. The name had been a beacon of hope for Nora Whitfield for 6 months. Now, as the train groaned to a halt against the long, splintered platform, the reality of the place hit her like a physical blow. It was not a city. It was a sprawling, muddy wound on the prairie. Wooden sidewalks, many with broken boards, fronted a long street of false-fronted buildings. Saloons, land offices, and general stores seemed to shoulder each other for space. The air smelled of mud, raw lumber, and something sour from a nearby tannery. Men in dirty canvas and broad hats spat tobacco juice into the street, their eyes cold and assessing as they watched the passengers disembark. Nora gathered her small, worn carpet bag and her reticule, her hands shaking slightly. She held the letter from Mr. Reed, her promise of a new life. She stepped down onto the platform, her Boston boots sinking into a patch of grime. She looked around, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear, searching for a man who matched the kind, steady face from the small photograph he had sent. No one approached her. Passengers found their families. Speculators shouted for porters. But Nora stood alone. Chaska stepped off the train behind her, a silent shadow. He, too, scanned the platform, but for a different reason. He was looking for the ticket office, for the way to undo his mistake. He needed to find the schedule for the next train north. He saw the girl, the one he had caught, standing adrift in the flow of people. He watched as she hesitantly approached a station agent. "Excuse me, sir?" Nora's voice was small but clear. "I am here to meet a Mr. Abram Reed, of the Reed Mercantile. He was to meet my train." The station agent, a harassed man with a green eye shade, barely looked up. Reed Abram Reed, never heard of him. Oh, but you must, Nora insisted, a threat of panic in her voice. He owns the mercantile. He wrote me. He is my... She stopped, unable to say the word fiancé to this indifferent stranger. Reed, you say? A new voice joined the conversation, one laced with an easy, unearned authority. A large man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped forward. He had a thick mustache and eyes that were too small for his fleshy face. That would be Sheriff Pike. Yes, Sheriff, Nora said, relieved. Can you direct me to Mr. Reed's mercantile? Sheriff Pike pushed his hat back, his gaze lingering on her face, her dress. Well now, miss, that is a sad bit of business. Abram Reed, yes, had a small shop. Had? Nora's hand went to her throat. The word was cold. Afraid so, the sheriff said, his tone a poor imitation of sympathy. Poor Mr. Reed passed on. Took a fever, too, maybe 3 weeks ago. Buried him proper, of course. The platform seemed to tilt under Nora's feet. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a stark, white mask. Passed on. The words made no sense. He had written her. He had promised. Her entire future, her honor, her escape. It was all tied to a man who was gone. Gone, she whispered. But the letters, the arrangement. Cheyenne is a hard place, miss, Pike said, stepping a little closer. A young lady like you, all alone. It is not a good situation. Not at all. He glanced around. Where's your luggage? This is all I have, Nora said, indicating her small bag. I see. The sheriff's tone shifted, the false sympathy fading. He now saw her not as a grieving fiancée, but as a problem. Unclaimed baggage. Well, you cannot stay here. I will see you settled. There is a rooming house. Decent enough, down the way. The Widow Johnson's. But my funds are... I was to be married. Nora stammered, humiliation burning in her cheeks. Like I said, a sad business. Pike took her arm, his grip too familiar, too firm. He began to steer her away from the platform. Now, a pretty young woman like you do not need to worry. Cheyenne has opportunities. There are gentlemen who are always looking for a good, refined woman. A man like Mr. Silas Crowley, for instance. He is a great benefactor to this town. I am sure he would be willing to sponsor a woman of your character, help you get on your feet. The implication was as slimy as the mud in the street. Nora tried to pull her arm back, but his grip was like iron. He was not helping her. He was processing her, like livestock. As he was leading her away, they passed a spot on the platform where a man had just collapsed. He was an old prospector by the look of him, his clothes in rags, coughing his lungs out. People stepped around him as if he were a dog, while the sheriff's head was turned. Nora saw something drop from the man's pocket. It was a small, folded piece of oilcloth. It fell unnoticed into a puddle of dirty rainwater. The man who had collapsed was clutching his chest, and from his pocket, Nora saw the corner of a small pouch, its leather embroidered a design that seemed familiar. But the sheriff was pulling her, and the man was groaning, and the world was ending. Come along, miss, Pike ordered. Nora, in a moment of pure, unthinking instinct, bent down as she passed. She pretended to adjust her bootlace. Her fingers darted out and snatched the oilcloth from the puddle. It was cold and wet. Without looking at it, she thrust it into the pocket of her dress, her heart hammering. Across the street, Chaska had his own welcome to Cheyenne. He had located the ticket office, but as he approached, 2 men stepped in front of him. They wore the same brass buttons as the soldiers he used to scout for, but their faces were hard and mean. They were railroad police. Where do you think you are going, Chief? One of them asked, spitting tobacco. Ticket office, Chaska said, his voice flat. Let's see your papers, the other one demanded. No vagrants allowed in the city limits. Chaska stood very still. He had papers, papers from the army, papers from the agency, pieces of white paper that were supposed to prove he was allowed to exist. He reached inside his jacket, slowly, so as not to spook them. Slowly, the first guard warned, his hand dropping to his sidearm. Chaska produced the folded documents. The guard snatched them. Chaska, Lakota! The guard read aloud, mispronouncing the name. Scout, U.S. Army, honorably discharged. He sneered. Quit the winning team. Did you? My train, Chaska said, his jaw tight. I am on the wrong train. I need to go north. He is in a hurry, the second guard said. He jabbed a finger at the deerskin pouch at Chaska's side. What is in the bag? Scout. A cold, white rage flickered deep in Chaska's chest. It is personal. Personal, huh? The first guard's eyes lit up with a petty, cruel power. Could be whiskey, could be stolen goods. Let's have a look. He reached for the pouch. Chaska moved faster than the man could see, his hand clamped around the guard's wrist, his grip like a steel trap. The bones in the man's wrist ground together. The guard cried out. Do not, Chaska said, his voice a low growl. Touch it. The second guard drew his pistol and pressed the muzzle against Chaska's ribs. Let him go. Let him go, or I will put a hole in you. Chaska looked from the gun to the man's eyes. He saw the fear, the anger, the willingness. He remembered his mother's voice. Years ago, after his father had been killed. Do not let them see your fire, my son. Keep it inside and use it to stay warm. Their fire only burns things down. He released the guard's wrist. The man staggered back, cradling his hand, his face pale. You are in a lot of trouble. Indian, the second guard hissed. He is clean, a new voice said. It was Elias Grant, the young reporter from the train, his notebook in hand. I saw his papers on the train. He is a former Army scout. Discharged. Honorable. He said the last word with emphasis. The guards looked at Elias, then at Chaska. The presence of another white man, one who could read and write and looked like he mattered, changed the arithmetic. Just move along, the first guard grumbled, rubbing his wrist. We do not like your kind here. Chaska held the man's gaze for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The ashes of his brother safe, the fire banked deep inside. He found himself on the main street, the mud seeping into his boots. He needed to find the schedule, but the encounter had left him rattled, his anger a bitter taste in his mouth. He just wanted to leave this place. He saw her then, Nora. She was standing alone on a street corner, looking utterly lost. The sheriff was gone. She was clutching her bag, her knuckles white. She looked up and saw him, and for a second, her expression was one of terror. Then, it settled into something else. Recognition. He was not one of them. He was the man who had caught her. She took a hesitant step toward him. Sir? Chaska stopped. He did not want to talk to her. He did not want to be involved. Sir, I am sorry to bother you, she said, her voice trembling. The sheriff, he told me to go to a boarding house, the Widow Johnson's, but I do not know this place. I do not have any money. My fiancé is dead. She said the last words with a flat finality, as if saying them aloud made them real. Chaska looked at her. Her proper Boston dress was already spattered with mud. Her face was pale with shock. She was a leaf in a storm, and the storm was all around them. He could see the eyes he had warned her about. Men in doorways, women behind curtains. The whole town was watching. The boarding house is 2 streets over, he said, his voice rough. On the east side of the tracks. It is not a good place. I have nowhere else, she whispered. He nodded, a sharp, angry gesture. This was not his fight. He turned to go. Wait, She fumbled in her reticule. Her hand emerged holding a small, crumpled paper packet. You were kind. On the train, you caught me." She held the packet out to him. "It is just brown sugar, from my home. It is all I have to offer." Chaska looked at the small offering. It was absurd. A piece of candy. In this place. He looked at her face, at the earnest, desperate sincerity. He had not been shown a moment of simple human kindness in he could not remember how long. He reached out and took the small packet. His fingers brushed hers. Her hand was cold as ice. "Cheyenne is not Boston, miss," he said, his voice softer. "Keep your eyes open. Trust no one, especially not men who offer to sponsor you. This town belongs to Silas Crowley." "The man the sheriff mentioned," Nora said. "He is not a benefactor," Chaska said. "He is a snake, and this whole town is his nest." He was about to add more when a shadow fell over them. Well, what have we here?" It was Walt Kearney. He had emerged from a saloon, and he was smiling. A wet, ugly smile. His eyes raked over Nora. "The little lady from the train," Kearney said, walking toward them, his spurs ringing on the boardwalk. "Looks like your welcoming party did not show. Sheriff Pike sent you to me." I do not know you, sir," Nora said, shrinking back. "You will," Kearney said. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. "A pretty thing like you should not be talking to reservation trash. You should be with a real man, a white man." Nora cried out, a small, sharp sound. Kearney yanked her toward him. "Let's go, darling. I will buy you a drink. We can talk about your arrangements." It happened in a single, fluid motion. Chaska stepped in. He did not go for his knife. He did not go for Kearney's gun. He struck Kearney's wrist, the one that held Nora. With the hard edge of his hand, there was a sharp crack. Kearney howled and his hand opened, releasing Nora. At the same time, Chaska's other hand shot out, not to strike, but to grab. He caught the front of Kearney's gun holster. With a violent twist, he ripped the entire holster, belt and all, from Kearney's waist. The heavy Colt revolver thudded to the boardwalk. Kearney stared, his face a mask of disbelief and pain, clutching his broken wrist. Chaska grabbed Nora's hand. "Run!" He did not wait for an answer. He pulled her off the boardwalk and into the alley between the saloon and the land office. Behind them, Kearney was screaming, not in pain, but in rage. "Get him, stop them! That Indian broke my wrist!" A whistle blew, shrill and demanding. The sound of running boots echoed from the main street. Chaska pulled Nora through the labyrinth of back alleys, his feet sure in the mud and refuse. She stumbled, her lungs burning, but she held onto his hand as if it were her only anchor in the world. They were running together, a stranger's act of violence tying them together more surely than any contract. Chaska stopped in the shadow of a water tower. He listened. The sounds of pursuit were heading toward the rail yard. He had looped them around. "We are safe," he panted, just for a moment. Nora leaned against the cold, damp wood, fighting for breath, tears of terror and frustration streaming down her face. Chaska watched her. He should leave. He should get his ticket and go. He should let the wind take his brother's ashes. But he looked at this girl, this mail-order bride, with her useless education and her brown sugar candy, and he saw a reflection of himself. Someone on the wrong train, in a world that wanted to consume them. His train north was not until the next morning, 5 o'clock. He had to stay the night in this town. He looked at Nora, her shoulders shaking. He could not leave her. Not now. Honor was not something on a piece of paper. It was not a discharge document or a marriage certificate. It was what a man did when no one was looking, in a place where the law was bought and sold. "The boarding house," he said, his voice quiet. "We will go there. But you will not go alone. I will stay. I will watch." Nora Whitfield looked up at the Lakota man, his face carved from the shadows. She saw no pity in his eyes. She saw something harder and better. She saw resolve. She nodded. The Widow Johnson's boarding house was not a house. It was a collection of patched roofs and raw lumber leaning against each other on the east side of the tracks, where the respectable part of Cheyenne gave up. The air smelled of boiled cabbage, stale whiskey, and a deeper, more permanent layer of despair. The widow was a gaunt woman with eyes like two spent cartridges. She took the silver coin Chaska offered, her hand like a claw, and pointed to a room at the end of a dark, narrow hall. She did not say a word. The room was a cell. It held a narrow cot, a washstand with a cracked basin, and a single, grime-filled window. Rain, which had been a fine mist, now ticked against the glass, driven by a rising wind. Chaska stood in the doorway. He looked at the flimsy lock on the door, then at the single wooden chair by the cot. "The lock is not strong," he said. His voice was low, filling the small, cold space. "Put the chair under the knob. It will make noise if they try." Nora nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She watched him, her protector, a man she had met only hours ago. "I will be outside," he said. "On the porch. You are safe." She wanted to ask him to stay, to stand inside the room, but she knew she could not. The impropriety was too great. Even now, she simply watched as he turned. He did not go far. She heard him settle onto the top step of the covered porch, a solid weight against the flimsy wall of her room. He was a dark, unmoving shape, a guardian in the growing twilight. Nora pushed the rickety chair into place, its legs scraping on the rough floorboards. She sat on the lumpy cot, the worn carpetbag at her feet. She was finally alone, and the full weight of the day crashed down on her. Abram Reed was dead. Her promise was broken. Her honor, the only currency she had, was gone. She was a ruined woman, trapped in a filthy room, in a town that wanted to consume her. The night stretched, taut and silent, broken only by the sound of the rain and the distant, mournful wail of a train. She could not sleep. She could not rest. She felt the presence of the man on the other side of the wall. After an hour of darkness, she could not stand the silence. She went to the door, her hand resting on the chair. "Sir," she called, her voice a low whisper. "Chaska." She tried his name. It felt strange and foreign on her tongue. She heard a small sound, a shifting of weight on the wooden porch. "I am here," his voice came back, muffled by the wood, but close. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the words rushing out. "Why are you helping me?" There was a long pause. The rain ticked against the roof. "My train north is not until 5 o'clock in the morning," he said. "I have time to kill." Nora knew it was more than that. She had seen the way the railroad police treated him. They were unkind to you. At the station. And that man, Kearney, you saved me from him. "This world is unkind," he said simply. "Cheyenne is the center of it. Get some sleep." "I cannot." She leaned her forehead against the cool, rough wood of the door. "I was supposed to be married. I was going to start a school." She said the last part as a confession, a secret she had barely admitted to herself. "That was the real dream, not the marriage. Not really, but the school. I had a small education. I thought I could teach the children here, teach them to read, to read poetry." Walt Whitman. The name hung in the air between them, a strange, delicate thing in this coarse, violent place. From the other side of the door, Chaska's voice was softer. "Poetry." He said the word as if tasting it. "My brother. He liked to draw. He drew pictures of the horses, the way the wind moved in the grass. He saw the world before it was fenced in." The raw, quiet grief in his voice made Nora catch her breath. "Your brother?" she asked gently. "He is in the pouch," Chaska said, and Nora knew he meant the deerskin bag he carried so carefully. "He is ashes. He died 3 months ago. He was 17. Oh, she breathed. It was a sound of pure, unadorned sorrow. A mining crew. Chaska continued, his voice flat, reporting facts that were too painful to feel. They wanted the land. The land was ours, by a treaty, a piece of paper. The paper did not matter. There was a conflict. He was not a fighter. He was shot. I was scouting for the army then. I was not there to stop it. I am so sorry, Nora whispered. They are trying to erase us, he said, the flatness gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. They draw lines on maps and say the land is new. They forget the people who were already here. They forget the bones in the ground. They will erase you, too. If you let them, they will call you a whore or a vagrant and put you in a cage or a crib. His words hit her like a slap. He was right. She was afraid of being called ruined. He was afraid of being made to disappear. They were both targets. The room was completely black. Nora fumbled in her reticule, her fingers finding her small tinderbox. She struck a match. The small flare of light illuminated her pale, tear-stained face. She lit a small, precious stub of a candle. She did not need the light to see. She needed it to fight. She placed the candle on the windowsill, its tiny flame a single point of defiance against the vast, wet darkness. It was a signal. I am still here. Outside, Chaska saw the small light flicker. He understood the impulse. He reached into his own pouch, his fingers bypassing the heavy weight of his brother's ashes. He found what he was looking for, a single hawk feather, tied with sinew to a small, smooth river stone. It was not a prayer to the white man's god. It was a connection to the wind, to the open sky, to the spirit of his brother. He held it in his hand, a small piece of a world that was vanishing. 2 different faiths, 1 sliver of light, 1 feather, both holding back the same night. Across town, in the back room of the Golden Spur Saloon, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of spilled whiskey. Sheriff Pike was pouring a glass for Deacon Abel. It is a complication, Deacon, Pike said, his voice a low growl. The girl, Nora, she was supposed to be met. Reed was supposed to hand her over. Deacon Abel took the whiskey and held it up to the light. He was a large man, his black suit straining at the seams, his face fleshy and pale. Abram Reed was a fool. He had the map, and he thought he could bargain with Mr. Crowley. He learned, as all men do, that you do not bargain with progress. Progress is inevitable. But now the girl is here, Pike insisted, unclaimed. And that Indian, Chaska, he interfered, broke Walt Kearney's wrist. Kearney is a blunt instrument, Abel sneered. We must be more subtle. The girl's reputation, that is our lever. She is a mail-order bride who has lost her fiancé. By the rules of society, she is ruined, a fallen woman. So we run her out, Pike asked, confused. No, you fool, Abel said, his small eyes gleaming. We save her. We save her honor. You will find her tomorrow. You will tell her that a respectable man, a benefactor of the church, has heard of her plight. This kind gentleman, moved by her tragic circumstances, has offered to marry her himself, to protect her good name. Pike stared, his mouth open. Mr. Crowley, marry her. It will be a private ceremony, Abel said, a deeply unpleasant smile spreading across his face. I will perform it myself. Once she is his wife, she is his property, and whatever she has, whatever that fool Reed sent her with, becomes his property. She will be secure. He will be satisfied, and the church will receive a most generous donation for its missionary work. It was past midnight. The rain had settled into a steady, cold drizzle. Chaska heard the footsteps before he saw the man. They were light, quick, and tried to be silent. Elias Grant, the reporter from the train, materialized out of the rain, his spectacles fogged. Mr. Chaska, Elias whispered, huddling on the step below. I had a feeling I might find you here. I saw you with the young lady. This is not a good place for her." Chaska said nothing. He just watched the young man, who shivered in the cold. "I have been digging," Elias said, his voice urgent and low. "This town is rotten. I came here to write about the spirit of the West. I found Silas Crowley." "You saw his seal on the train," Chaska stated. "Yes, the water rights registry. It is all a sham," Elias said, pulling a notebook from his pocket. "Crowley is not just grabbing land. He is grabbing the water. He has a map, or so I hear, of a place called the Sweetwater Basin. He plans to dam it, control it. If he controls the water, he controls the entire territory. And in 2 days, he is holding a legal land auction." "He cannot sell land that is not his," Chaska said. "He can if he has a grant," Elias countered. "And he does. He has a federal grant, endorsed by, you guessed it, Deacon Abel's church organization, for the civilizing of the heathens. It is all legal, all blessed by God and the government." Chaska felt the noose tighten. His people lived near the Sweetwater. It was sacred. "They killed the man who had the real map," Elias said, his voice dropping even lower. "A fellow named Abram Reed, the girl's fiancé. They thought he was gone, but he was just hiding. He collapsed on the platform today. He died an hour ago at the station. I was there. They listed it as a fever." Chaska's blood went cold. The old prospector, the man whose pocket had held the familiar embroidery. "He is the one." "Yes," Elias said. "And whatever he had, whatever proof he had, is gone. Crowley wins." He looked at the door to Nora's room. "Be careful. Chaska, they are tying up loose ends." Elias Grant faded back into the rain, leaving Chaska alone with a new, terrible knowledge. Inside the room, Nora was not asleep. She had taken the damp oilcloth fragment from her pocket and smoothed it out on the cot. It was not a full map. It was a corner, showing a basin and a series of lines, like veins. But there was something else. In the corner, drawn in dark ink, was a symbol, a circle, with a single, upward-pointing triangle inside it. It meant nothing to her, but she had seen it before. She grabbed her carpet bag. The bag was cheap, its lining frayed. Her mother had repaired it for her, just before she left Boston. Her mother had sewn a patch into the bottom lining to cover a hole. Nora ran her hand along the bottom of the bag, feeling the rough, heavy stitching. Then she stopped. There was a lump. It was not a patch. It was something under the patch. Her fingers, clumsy with haste, found a loose thread. She pulled. A seam opened. She reached inside the lining. Her fingers closed on a small, stiff piece of canvas. She pulled it out. It was a small, square piece of fabric, carefully folded, and stitched onto it, in thick, red thread, was a symbol. A circle, with a single, upward-pointing triangle. She held the embroidered patch next to the map fragment. They were identical. A cold, terrifying realization washed over her. Abram Reed. He had been afraid. He had not been bringing her to a new life. He had been sending her with one. He had hidden his treasure, the map, in the lining of her bag. This fragment, from the dying prospector, Abram Reed. It was the other half. He had not died of a fever. He had been murdered, and he had sent the proof, the treasure, with the only person he thought no one would suspect, his mail-order bride. Chaska knocked softly on the door, a sharp, urgent rhythm. "Nora!" The chair scraped. The door opened a crack. Nora's face was white, her eyes huge in the candlelight. "The man at the station," he said, his voice urgent. "The one who collapsed. It was Abram Reed, your fiancé." "I know," she whispered. Her voice was shaking, but not with fear, with anger. He sent this." She held up the map fragment and the embroidered patch. Chaska looked at the symbol. He knew it. Mini Wiconi, Water is life. It was a sacred marker. "We have to leave," Chaska said. "The decision made, hard and fast. Now. Tonight." "Leave," she said. "Go where?" "Away from Cheyenne. North. To my people. That symbol. It is Lakota. It is from the Sweetwater Basin. They can read this map. They know the land." "But my reputation," Nora stammered, the old fear dying hard. "If I run off, with you, an Indian, in the middle of the night—" "Your reputation or your life," Chaska said, his voice hard as stone. "They killed him for that map. They will kill you for it. Kearney, the sheriff, the deacon. They are all Crowley's men. They are already hunting you. They will be here by morning." Nora looked at the man in front of her. His clothes were damp, his face harsh in the gloom. He was a stranger, an Indian, everything she had been taught to fear, and he was the only person in the world who had told her the truth. She made her choice. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I trust you." "There is a back alley," Chaska said, turning. "It leads to the stables. We can—" He stopped. He froze. He held up a hand for silence. A new sound, cutting through the rain. Not the wind, not the trains. Horses, several of them, moving slowly, deliberately, into the alley behind the boarding house. Chaska put a hand on Nora's arm, pushing her back into the room. He stepped to the edge of the porch, peering into the blackness. A lantern was lit. Suddenly, in the alley, it threw huge, distorted shadows against the opposite wall. The shapes of men with rifles. "She is in there," a voice called, rough and gravelly. It was not Kearney. "Pike said to bring her, and the Indian— Crowley wants the Indian alive, if possible. He wants to ask him some questions." A man laughed, a short, ugly bark. "He will not be in any shape to answer." Chaska and Nora were trapped. The regulators were in the back. The street was the only way out, but they would be seen. A shot rang out. It was not aimed at them. It was a warning. A bullet splintered the wooden porch post, right where Chaska's head had been a second before. "Come on out, Indian," the voice roared, echoing in the narrow space. "And bring the girl, or the next one goes right through her door." The wood exploded. Splinters of rain-soaked pine bit into Chaska's cheek. He grabbed Nora and threw them both backward, off the porch and into the alley, crashing into a stack of empty barrels. The noise was deafening as the barrel stack collapsed, a clatter of wood and metal hoops that momentarily covered the men's shouts. "This way," Chaska yelled, his voice a raw command. He did not run toward the front street. He ran toward the blackness at the far end of the alley, a narrow gap between the boarding house and a tannery, a space choked with refuse and smelling of lye and rotting hides. He pulled Nora with him. Her fine Boston boots sank, and she nearly lost one. "Keep up," he grunted. They burst through the gap and into the sprawling, unlit chaos of the railroad shantytown. There were no streets here, only muddy footpaths between shacks built of stolen lumber, canvas, and tin. A dog barked, a high, frantic sound. A man cursed at them from a darkened doorway. "They are back here," a voice roared. A rifle cracked again, the bullet thudding into the wall of a shack, followed by a woman's scream from inside. "They are shooting wild," Chaska panted, pulling Nora low as they ducked behind a rusted, overturned boiler. "They want us alive, but they are stupid." He peered up. The rain was slowing, but the sky was a low, heavy blanket. Through a break in the clouds, he saw a glimmer. Wikapi Owangila, the star that stands still, the North Star. He had his bearings. "Where are we going?" Nora gasped, her chest burning. Her shoulder throbbed where she had slammed it against the wall. "Out," he said. He pointed, not to a path, but to a dark, wet ditch that ran alongside the shacks. It was a drainage gulch, half full of foul water. It will be cold, but it will hide us. He slid into the ditch first, the icy water sucking at his legs, and reached up for her. Nora hesitated for only a second. She looked back at the light of the lanterns, heard the men's heavy boots splashing through the mud. She took his hand and lowered herself into the freezing water. It soaked her skirts and dress, pulling at her like a living, greedy thing. They moved for what felt like an eternity. They crouched, half walking, half swimming, through the filth of the town. The ditch followed the path of least resistance, curving away from the lights, away from the rail yard. It was an old buffalo trace, Chaska realized, worn down over centuries, now reduced to a sewer, but it was leading them north. After an hour, the shacks thinned, and the ditch rose, becoming a shallow, muddy cattle trail. The lights of Cheyenne were a faint, yellow smear against the dark. The only sounds were the wind in the grass and Nora's ragged, shivering breaths. "We have to keep moving," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He pulled her from the trail and onto the open prairie. "We have to be far away by morning." They walked for the rest of the night. Nora had never known such exhaustion. Her feet were numb, her wet clothes a prison of ice. Chaska moved beside her, a steady, tireless shadow. He had given her his jacket, but it did little good. She was a city girl, and the open plain in the dark was a terrifying, endless ocean. Just as the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky, she stumbled and fell to her knees. "I cannot," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I cannot walk another step." Chaska stopped. He looked at her, a small, collapsed heap in the grayness. He looked north, his jaw tight. Then he bent down and, without a word, lifted her into his arms. She was light, a bundle of wet wool and trembling limbs. She was too exhausted to protest. She put her head against his chest, felt the steady, strong beat of his heart under his flannel shirt, and closed her eyes. He carried her for another mile. The land began to rise, rolling into low hills. As the sun finally broke the horizon, Chaska set her down on a ridge overlooking a small, sheltered valley. Below them was a ranch. It was not large, but it was orderly. A log house with a plume of smoke rising from the chimney, a strong corral, and a barn built of sod and timber. "Where are we?" Nora asked, her voice hoarse. "A friend," Chaska said. "Maybe—" He walked down the slope, not calling, but simply approaching. A dozen horses, fine, strong animals, watched him from the corral. As they neared the house, the door opened. A man stepped out, a rifle in his hands. He was old, his face a map of wrinkles, his hair a shock of white. "That is far enough," the man called, his voice a gravelly Irish rasp. He squinted at Chaska. "I do not know you, and I do not like strangers before breakfast." Chaska stopped. "Old Tom Brennan," he said. The old man's eyes narrowed. He took a step forward, the rifle still level. "My grandfather," Chaska said, "was called Lame Deer. He gave your family meat in the long winter of 1863. When the snow was as high as a man's chest, he saved your wife. He saved your son." Old Tom Brennan stood frozen, the rifle slowly lowered. He looked at Chaska's face, at the high cheekbones, the dark eyes. "Sweet Mary, Mother of God." The old man breathed. He dropped the rifle and walked forward, his hands outstretched. "Lame Deer's boy, I see him now. I see your father in your face. Come in, Lord God. Come in, child. You are freezing." He bustled them inside. The house was one room, warm and clean, smelling of coffee and wood smoke. A woman sat by the fire, her back to them. She was slender, her black hair in a single braid, and she was grinding herbs in a stone bowl. "Rosa," Tom said, his voice full of a sudden, panicked energy. "Put the kettle on. Get blankets. Look at them. They are half drowned." The woman, Rosa Martinez. turned. Her face was beautiful, ageless, her eyes dark and calm. She looked at Chaska and nodded in greeting. Then she looked at Nora. Her gaze was sharp, missing nothing. She saw Nora's shiver, the mud, the exhaustion, and she saw the dark, torn patch on her shoulder, where the wool of her dress was matted with blood. "She is hurt," Rosa said, her voice soft, with a slight Spanish accent. I am fine," Nora stammered, only then feeling the stinging, fiery pain in her shoulder. She must have torn it in the alley. "Sit," Rosa commanded. She pointed to a stool, while old Tom fussed at the fire. Rosa took a small, sharp knife from her belt. Nora flinched. Rosa simply and efficiently cut the seam of Nora's dress, pulling the heavy, wet wool away from the wound. It was a long, jagged tear, deep and filled with grime. Nora looked at the blood, at her ruined dress, and a fresh wave of despair washed over her. She began to cry, silent, hopeless tears. Rosa took a clean cloth and dipped it in hot water. "Do not cry for the dress," she said, her voice low as she began to dab at the wound. "It is only cloth." It is all I have." Nora wept. "My honor, my life, it is all ruined." Rosa stopped. She looked at Nora's face. "Your life is not ruined," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "It has just begun, the path to your own heart. Chica, it often runs through truth, not through a registry, not through a man's name, but through here." She tapped her own chest. "Now, this will sting." She poured a dark liquid onto the wound. Nora hissed, but she held still. Rosa stitched the wound with a small, curved needle and fine thread, her hands quick and sure. While this was happening, old Tom had brought Chaska a cup of scalding coffee. "Lame deer's grandson," he said, shaking his head. "I never thought to see any of his line again. Your grandfather, he found us when we were digging for roots in the snow. My boy, Michael, he had the fever. We had eaten nothing but bark for a week. Your grandfather came. He left half a bison. He asked for nothing." "It was the way," Chaska said, his hands wrapped around the warm mug. "It is not the way of the men in Cheyenne." Tom said darkly, "You are in trouble. I see it on you." "What is it, Crowley?" Chaska nodded. "He wants the water, the Sweetwater Basin." Tom spat into the fire. "That bastard! He is choking this land. He wants it all." "He has a map," Chaska said, "or part of one." He looked at Nora. Nora, her shoulder bandaged, her body wrapped in a thick wool blanket, reached into the bodice of her ruined dress. Her hand was shaking. She pulled out the oilcloth fragment and the embroidered canvas patch. She handed them to Chaska. Chaska laid them on the rough wooden table. "Abram Reed," Nora explained, her voice stronger now. The man I was to marry. He was murdered for this. He hid it with me." Tom peered at the fragments. "I know that symbol," he said, pointing at the Lakota marker. "The holy water." He went to a large wooden chest and pulled out a long, rolled tube of yellowed paper. He spread it on the table. It was an old map, drawn by a surveyor, but with handwritten notes all over it. "I kept this from my prospecting days. It shows things the new maps do not. It shows the old trails." Chaska moved Nora's fragment over the map. The lines, the contours of the basin, matched, but Tom's map showed something more. It showed a dotted line, and beside it, in faded brown ink, the words U.S. Treaty Land, Fort Laramie, 1868, not for settlement. "It is on treaty land," Chaska said, his voice electric. "The basin is on land that is still ours. Legally." "That is why Reed was a threat," Tom said, his fist hitting the table. "If Crowley dams that basin, he is not just choking the Lakota. He is choking us, the water for this ranch, for every ranch in this valley. It comes from that basin's runoff. If he wins, we all die of thirst. The town, the ranches, the Red Willow camp. We all share the same blood, and he is trying to cut the vein." A silence settled on the small cabin. The stakes were suddenly terribly clear. "We have to show this to the council," Chaska said. He looked at Tom. "Red Willow, my cousin, little bird. Is there? The elders will know this symbol. They will know what to do." "Red Willow is 2 days' ride north," Tom said. "You cannot get there on foot, and Crowley's men will be all over the territory. He has put a price on your heads. I guarantee it." "We need horses," Chaska said. "You will take my 2 best," Tom said immediately. "And food, and a clean coat for the girl." He looked at Rosa, who nodded. "It is a debt, long overdue." They rode out an hour later. The sun was high, but the wind was cold. Nora was dressed in a pair of Rosa's canvas trousers and a flannel shirt, a warm sheepskin coat over them. She felt strange, immodest, and more practical than she had ever felt in her life. She was on a strong bay mare, and Chaska rode a black gelding. He had the deerskin pouch with his brother's ashes, and now he also carried the 2 maps, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked safely away. They rode north, staying low in the ravines, avoiding the main trails. They did not speak much. The land was too big, and their task too heavy. That night, they made a small, cold camp by a stream. Chaska built a fire that was nearly invisible, set deep in a rocky crevice. He gave Nora the thickest bedroll. He sat across the small fire, his back against a rock, his rifle across his knees. The silence was deafening. Nora, needing to fill it, to feel something of the world she had known, pulled her small, battered book of poems from her carpet bag. It was one of the few things she had saved. She opened it, and by the low, flickering light of the fire, she began to read. Her voice was small, and it trembled. "I sing the body electric," she read. "The armies of those I love engirth me, and I engirth them." She fumbled the words, feeling foolish. The raw, open passion of the poem felt alien and loud in the vast, quiet darkness. Chaska watched her. He did not understand the words, but he understood her. He understood the need to hold on to something. "He does not know this land," Chaska said, his voice quiet. Nora looked up, confused. "Mr. Whitman?" "He sings," Chaska said, "but he does not listen." He nodded toward the darkness. "The wind, the grass, it has its own voice. Listen." Nora closed the book. She sat very still. At first, she heard nothing, just the wind. Then, she began to hear it, the high, thin whisper of the long grasses, the deeper sigh of the wind in the pines on the ridge, the low, rhythmic gurgle of the stream. It was not a song. It was a conversation. "What does it say?" she whispered. Chaska's eyes were on the darkness, on the line of the ridge. "It says the world is alive," he said. "It says to be still, to watch, that we are small, but we are here." They sat in silence for a long time. It was not an awkward silence. It was a shared one. The wall between them, the wall of race, of custom, of fear, had begun to dissolve. He was not an Indian. She was not a white lady. They were 2 people, alive, in the darkness, listening to the wind. As the fire died to embers, Chaska stood. "Get some sleep," he said. "I will watch." "You will sleep, too?" she asked, her voice small. "I will watch," he repeated. As she was settling into the bedroll, a sound made Chaska freeze, a faint, flapping sound, and then a soft coo. He moved to the edge of the camp and saw it, a pigeon, huddled on a rock, a small metal tube on its leg. It was exhausted, a city bird. He gently caught it. He took the small, rolled paper from the tube. He brought it to the last, dying ember of the fire. He unrolled it. It was from Elias Grant. It was only a few words. scribbled in haste. Reward posted, $500 for the girl and the Indian, dead or alive. Pike has sent regulators north. They are riding for Red Willow. They know. The note was a death warrant. Reward posted, $500. Dead or alive. Chaska crushed the small paper in his fist. Elias had done his part, but the warning was a cold comfort. Pike has sent regulators north. They know. They were no longer just running. They were being hunted. We cannot rest, Chaska said. His voice was flat, all exhaustion erased by the new, sharp edge of danger. He doused the last ember of the fire with water from his canteen. The rising sun was not a promise. It was a spotlight. Nora, her body a single, dull ache, pulled herself to her feet. She saw the look on his face and did not ask questions. She simply moved to her horse. The trust between them was no longer built on words, but on shared silence, on the rhythm of the chase. They rode for 2 days, pushing the animals harder than Chaska liked. They bypassed the wide, open valleys and kept to the high, rocky ridges, the horses' hooves slipping on shale, the wind a constant, cutting whip. Chaska navigated by the sun, by the bend of the streams, by a knowledge so deep it was instinct. Nora watched him, a man who seemed to be reading a map written on the land itself. She, in turn, watched their back trail, her eyes scanning the horizons until they burned. Late in the afternoon of the second day, he stopped the horses at the top of a deep ravine. We are here, he said. Nora looked. She saw nothing, only a narrow, winding canyon, its walls streaked with red rock and juniper. Red Willow, he said, and urged his horse down a path so narrow it seemed impossible. The path opened suddenly into a hidden, circular valley, a perfect bowl protected from the wind. A clear, fast stream, the Red Willow cut through it. Dozens of lodges, some of traditional hide, others more permanent structures of log and sod, were scattered along the banks. Smoke rose from several, and the air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the sharp, clean scent of sage. Their arrival was not a surprise. A young boy on a spotted pony, posted as a lookout, had seen them. As they rode into the center of the camp, people emerged from the lodges. They were not the wild savages of the books Nora had read. They were families, men mending harnesses, women scraping hides, children laughing as they chased a dog. But the laughter stopped. They all stopped. They watched, their faces curious, wary, and, when they looked at Nora, hard. She was the enemy. She was the color of the men who drove them from their land. She pulled the sheepskin coat tighter, her hand unconsciously going to the map hidden in her shirt. Chaska dismounted. He stood tall, the deerskin pouch at his side, his gaze steady. He scanned the crowd, a deep, painful longing in his eyes. He was home, but he was a stranger. I am Chaska, he called out, his voice clear in the silence. Son of Spotted Elk, I have come home. I seek my cousin, Little Bird. A woman stepped out from the largest lodge. She was Chaska's age, tall and strong, her black hair in 2 thick braids, her dress decorated with fine quill work. She did not run to him. She walked, her stride measured and proud. She stopped 10 feet from him. You are Chaska, she said, her voice clear. She looked him up and down. You have been gone a long time. You wear the white man's clothes. You were a scout for the bluecoats. It was not a question. It was a judgment. I was, Chaska said, his voice quiet. And I have brought my brother home. He touched the pouch at his side. Little Bird's expression softened, just for a moment. Her gaze flicked to Nora, who still sat on her horse, frozen. And you bring one of them with you, a woman. She is not a threat, Chaska said. She is with me. We are hunted. Little Bird looked at Nora, a long, assessing gaze that stripped Nora bare. She saw the fear, but she also saw the strength beneath it. She saw the trousers, The bandaged shoulder, the soot on her face. This was not a lady from a magazine. "You have the stink of the railroad on you," Little Bird said. "Both of you, the stink of that town." She turned and went back into her lodge. She emerged with a braid of dried sage. She lit it, and a thick, aromatic smoke rose into the air. She walked first to Chaska. She fanned the smoke over him with a hawk feather, over his head, his arms, his chest, his legs. He closed his eyes, breathing it in, the smoke of his home, of his past. Then Little Bird turned to Nora. Nora flinched, the smoke stinging her eyes. "Breathe it in," Chaska said, his voice low. "It is a blessing. It cleanses." Nora, her heart pounding, bowed her head and accepted the ritual. She felt the feather touch her hair, her shoulders. She breathed in the strange, wild scent, and as she exhaled, she felt a small, hard knot of fear inside her begin to dissolve. She was not in Boston, she was somewhere else, and she was alive. When the ritual was done, Little Bird led them to the council lodge. The elders were already waiting. 3 old men, their faces like carved stone, sat on buffalo robes. The air inside was warm and still. Little Bird spoke first, in the rapid flowing language of the Lakota. She told them who Chaska was, who his father was, that he had brought his brother's ashes. Chaska then stepped forward. He spoke in his language, and Nora could feel the passion and the pain in his voice. Then he switched to English, his gaze on the oldest of the elders. "This is Nora Whitfield," he said. "She was to be married to a man in Cheyenne. That man, Abram Reed, was murdered. He was murdered by Silas Crowley." The elders' faces did not change, but a low murmur went through the lodge. They knew that name. "Crowley wants the water," Chaska continued. "The Sweetwater Basin. He has a plan to dam it." "He cannot," the oldest elder said, his voice like rocks shifting. "That is our water. It is the blood of the earth. It is treaty land. His law says it is not." Chaska said, he looked at Nora. "Show them." Nora, her hands trembling, stepped forward. She pulled the fragments from her shirt, the oilcloth map fragment and the canvas patch with the red symbol. She laid them before the elders. The old man's eyes, which had been cloudy, suddenly sharpened. He reached out a gnarled finger and traced the symbol. "Mini-Wikoni." "The water sign," he said, his voice a low, reverent whisper. "It is true. This is a map of the veins of the earth. It shows the springs, the old springs, where life begins." He looked at Chaska, then at Nora. "This is a great, holy thing. This map proves our claim, not just by your paper treaty, but by a law that is much older." "We believe the treaty is our only hope in the white man's court," Nora said, her voice finding its strength. "This map, combined with another one from an old prospector, proves that the basin is on the land from the Fort Laramie Treaty." "The white man's court," the elders said, his voice laced with a bitter history. "It is a long way to that court, and we have few friends there. Your paper laws are like wind. They change. Our law, the law of this water, is permanent." "Crowley is not waiting," Chaska said. "He is selling the land in 2 days. He has a legal grant, blessed by the church." Before the elder could respond, a sharp cry came from outside. "The lookout!" A man burst into the lodge. "Riders!" he shouted. "Many riders. They carry the iron poles and the sheriff's star." Chaska and Nora ran outside. The camp was in chaos. At the mouth of the valley, a line of 20 men on horseback had appeared. They were not soldiers. They were rough men, armed with rifles and sidearms. They sat beside men with tripods and measuring sticks, surveyors, the Iron Wolves. And at their head, on a big gray horse, was Sheriff Pike. He rode a few yards into the camp, his hand held high. "I am here in my official capacity," he boomed, his voice full of false authority. "I have a warrant for the man known as Chaska, for the kidnapping of a white woman, and a warrant for the woman. Nora Whitfield, for absconding from her legal guardian, the town of Cheyenne. Chaska stepped forward, his hand on his knife. Little Bird grabbed his arm. "No," she said, "not like this." The women of the camp, as if moved by a single, silent signal, began to walk. They left their lodges, their scraping, their cooking. They walked, one by one, to the center of the camp, to the community well that was fed by the Red Willow stream. Little Bird joined them. They formed a line, a human wall, 3 deep, in front of the well. They held no weapons. They just stood, their faces proud and defiant. They were protecting the water. Pike's eyes scanned the crowd, and he saw Nora. His face lit up with a greasy smile. "Miss Whitfield," he called, riding his horse closer. "Thank God you are safe now. This savage has confused you. Come with me. Come back to town, and I will see you are protected. We will find you a new guardian. I told you, Mr. Crowley is a generous man." This was the moment. All her life, Nora had been told what to do, by her father, by her society, by the letters she had received. She was a piece of property, to be passed from one man to the next. She looked at Pike. She looked at Chaska, his face a mask of rage, his past and present at war inside him. He saw the surveyors, the men he used to work for, the men who had led to his brother's death. He saw the cycle repeating, and his hand clenched and unclenched, wanting to kill, knowing it would solve nothing. Nora took a step forward, and another. She walked past Chaska, past the line of defiant women. She stopped in the open, muddy space between the camp and the regulators. Her voice, when it came, was not the reedy whisper of Boston. It was clear and strong, and it carried on the cold, valley air. "I am not confused. Sheriff Pike," she shouted. "I am not with this man by force. He saved my life. You and the man you work for tried to sell me like cattle, just as you are trying to steal this land." Pike's face turned a dull, angry red. "You are hysterical, Miss. You do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I am saying," she cried, her body trembling with a new, terrifying power. "I am the keeper of Abram Reed's map, and I will not go with you." "Then you will be arrested," Pike roared, drawing his pistol. "Along with every one of these." "Hold your fire, Sheriff," a new voice yelled. Everyone turned. A single rider was galloping down the canyon path. It was old Tom Brennan. His white hair was flying, and he was waving a piece of paper. "This is not your jurisdiction." "Pike!" Tom shouted, pulling his horse to a skidding stop between the two groups. "You may not care about that, but your boss does. This is a federal matter now." He threw a letter at Pike's chest. Pike fumbled it, his face a mask of confusion. "What is this?" "A summons," Tom said, breathing hard. "From Judge William T. Hayes of the Federal Circuit Court. That reporter, Grant, he is a smart one. He telegraphed the judge in Laramie. The judge has heard rumors of Crowley's land grab. He is displeased. He has issued a summons, a hearing, all parties, in Cheyenne, in 7 days. You, Crowley, and them," he pointed to the elders, "to present all evidence regarding the Sweetwater Basin." Pike stared at the paper. It was real. It had the federal seal. He was a town sheriff. This was a federal judge. He could not shoot his way out of this. He looked at his men. They were paid to bully, not to fight the United States government. This changes nothing," Pike stammered. "This is still—" "It changes everything," a voice sneered. A man rode forward from the back of the regulator pack. His arm was in a crude sling, his face blackened with soot, his eyes burning with a personal, hateful fury. It was Walt Kearney. "Crowley pays me," Kearney said, his voice a low rasp. "Not some judge in a black dress. Crowley said to stop this. He said to stop them." Before anyone could react, Kearney pulled a torch from his saddlebag. It was already lit. He had been waiting. He cursed as he fumbled with his good hand, then threw the torch not at the camp, but at the dry, yellow grass upwind. The grass, cured by the autumn chill, went up with a whoosh. The wind, funneled by the canyon, whipped the small fire into an instant wall of flame. It moved with the speed of a running horse, straight toward the lodges, straight toward the line of women. Chaos. The regulators' horses screamed and reared. Pike, cursing, turned his men to escape the flames. Kearney just sat on his horse, laughing. Chaska roared. A sound of pure, primal rage, but it was not at Kearney. It was at the fire. "Buckets," he yelled in Lakota. "Blankets to the stream now." The camp, trained for this, moved as one. Men, women, even children, ran to the stream, soaking blankets, filling pots. Chaska grabbed a shovel and ran to the front, digging a frantic, desperate line in the dirt, trying to create a fire break. Nora stood frozen for 1 second, the heat washing over her face. Then she saw him. A small boy, no more than 4 years old, had been playing by a lodge. He was separated from his mother. He stood in the direct path of a finger of fire, his face crumpled in silent terror. Nora did not think. She ran. She forgot the heat, forgot the smoke. She ran, her body screaming, and snatched the boy from the ground. She wrapped her own sheepskin coat around him, shielding him. A plume of black smoke enveloped her. She could not see. She could not breathe. She turned, disoriented, and ran, her lungs burning. She burst out of the smoke and stumbled, falling to her knees. She was safe. Little Bird was there, her face grim. Nora pushed the crying, coughing boy into her arms. "You saved him," Little Bird said, her voice full of a new, strange emotion. Nora looked at her hands. They were red, blistered. She looked at the line of fire. Chaska was there, a silhouette against the flames, his body moving with a desperate, rhythmic violence as he beat the fire back, shoulder to shoulder with the other men of the camp. They were diverting it, just barely, turning it from the lodges toward the rock wall of the canyon. That night, the camp was saved. The valley was scarred, a great black wound running up its side, but the people were safe. They were exhausted, angry, but united. Nora sat by a small fire, her hands wrapped in cool, wet cloths that Rosa would have given her. Little Bird sat beside her, sharing a piece of roasted meat. They did not speak, but the silence was one of companionship. Chaska was with the elders, his face grim, planning for the trip to Cheyenne, for the hearing. Guards were posted, their eyes on the canyon mouth. Nora was so tired, she could barely keep her eyes open. She leaned her head back, just for a second. A hand touched her shoulder. She smiled, thinking it was Little Bird, offering comfort. She turned. It was not Little Bird. It was Walt Kearney. His face was a mask of soot and rage, his smile a terrifying rictus. His good hand clamped over her mouth before she could even draw a breath to scream. "Mr. Crowley," he hissed, his voice like dry leaves, his breath hot and foul in her ear. "He wants to see you, Missy, to discuss the map. Personal." He dragged her backward, into the shadows, his broken arm a dark, useless thing at his side, his good hand a steel trap over her face. Chaska's reaction was not a thought. It was an explosion. He was moving before Little Bird's cry of alarm had faded, launching himself from the fireside, grabbing his knife as he went. He saw the tracks in the mud, one clear boot print and one dragging, scuffed trail. Kearney. He met Little Bird at the edge of the camp. She held a heavy throwing stick. Her eyes were black with fury. "He went for the high rocks," she said, her voice a low hiss. "He has her horse and his... He is one man. He is wounded," Chaska said, his voice a low growl of controlled rage. He was already moving, not running, but flowing over the ground in a scout's trot. He is a snake, Little Bird countered, matching his pace. He did not go to the high rocks. That is a lie. He went to the water, the old drainage ditch that feeds the stream. It is the only place a man can hide. Chaska stopped. He looked at the earth. She was right. The obvious trail, the one heading up, was a feint. The real trail, barely visible, was a broken branch near the stream bed. He nodded, a sharp, grim acknowledgement of his cousin's skill. You circle to the south. I will take the north bank. He cannot escape us both. They split, melting into the shadows. Nora's mind was a blaze of white terror. Kearney's good hand was clamped over her mouth, his fingers digging into her cheek, tasting of soot and tobacco. His broken arm, in its crude sling, was jammed against her back, and he was using his full weight to propel her through the darkness. He was strong, his strength born of a sick, desperate rage. You are going to see Crowley, he panted, his hot, foul breath in her ear. But first, you are going to see me, you and that redskin. You cost me my wrist. I am going to... His words were cut off as he shoved her into a deep, muddy ditch, concealed by overgrown willows. It was the old drainage cut. He had his horse and her mare tethered just inside. He was clumsy with his one good hand, trying to tie her hands, but he was also desperate. He shoved her against the muddy bank. "Do not scream," he hissed, his face inches from hers, "or I will break your neck before he can ever find you." Nora's terror was so complete. It had burned through itself and left something else, a cold, hard kernel of rage. This man had burned the land. He had threatened the child. He was the author of all this. She would not be his victim. As he fumbled with a length of rope, his attention on the knot, her eyes darted in the gloom. He had been careless. His own knife, a small skinning blade, was in a sheath on his belt, on the side of his good arm. He was using that arm to tie her. He had forgotten his other weapon. No, not that. She looked at her own feet, her boots, the ones Tom Brennan had given her. They were sturdy, with a hard heel. She waited. "There," he grunted, finishing a loop. "Now." She did not scream. She acted. She brought her right boot up and stomped down. With all her weight, on his left foot, she felt a satisfying crunch of bone. Kearney howled. It was a high, thin sound of pure agony. His good hand flew from her face to his foot. It was the only second she needed. Nora grabbed the front of his shirt and used his own momentum to twist away from him. She scrambled up the muddy bank, pulling herself out of the ditch. Kearney, screaming curses, lunged after her. He was on his feet, but his face was white with pain. He forgot his horse, forgot his plan. He just wanted her. He burst through the willows. Chaska was waiting. He had come from the north bank, silent as the shadow of a hawk. He did not tackle Kearney. He did not brawl. He hit him once, an open palm strike to the throat. It was not a killing blow, but it was a stopping one. Kearney crumpled, his hands flying to his neck, making a horrible gagging sound. He could not breathe. He could not shout. Chaska stood over him. He did not look at Nora. His eyes, in the moonlight, were flat and cold and terrible. He pulled his knife. "Chaska, no!" Nora cried, stumbling toward him. "He will always hunt you," Chaska said, his voice empty. "A snake like this, you do not warn it. You kill it." "No," Nora said, grabbing his arm. The arm with the knife. He froze, his muscles like steel, but he did not move. "Please, not for him, for you. Do not let him make you a killer." The words hit him. He looked at her face, streaked with mud and tears, her eyes pleading. He looked at the man on the ground, who was now weeping, clutching his broken foot and his bruised throat. Chaska breathed out, a long, shuddering sigh. The coldness in his eyes faded, replaced by a deep, weary pain. He sheathed his knife, but he was not finished. He bent down and grabbed Kearney by the hair, hauling his head up. Kearney's eyes were wide with terror. "You are marked," Chaska said, his voice a low promise. He pulled the man's pistol from its holster. Kearney had taken it back earlier and threw it deep into the stream. Then he took his own knife back out. Kearney squeezed his eyes shut. Chaska did not cut his throat. With 2 fast, economical movements, he sliced the suspenders from Kearney's trousers. The man's pants fell, heavy and wet, to his ankles. Then, before Kearney could react, Chaska pressed the flat, cold blade of the knife against the man's cheek. He held it there for one long, terrifying second. Then he pulled it away. He had not broken the skin. He had only left a cold line of fear. "If I see you again," Chaska whispered, "I will not stop. Go!" He stood. Little Bird had arrived. Silent, at the edge of the clearing. She held Kearney's horse. "Take his horse," Chaska said to his cousin. "Let him walk back to Cheyenne, in his bare feet, with his broken wrist, and his broken foot, and no trousers." Kearney, humiliated, sobbing, began to crawl away. He did not look back. Chaska turned to Nora. He saw her, truly saw her. Her burned hands, her muddy, torn clothes, the look in her eyes. It was not fear, it was something else. Pride. He started to move toward her, but a sound stopped him. A horse, whinnying in the camp. A shout. "More riders," Nora whispered, her new strength vanishing. "No," Little Bird said, her head tilted, listening. "They are agitated. Something is wrong." The sky, which had been clear, was now a strange, pale, glowing gray. A single, perfect, 6-sided flake of ice drifted down and landed on Chaska's glove. Snow, an early, hard, plains snow. "We have to go," Little Bird said, her voice urgent. "Now, this fire has scarred the valley. There is no shelter here, and this snow—" "This is not a gentle snow. This is a killer. We must get to the high caves." Chaska nodded. "You lead. We will be right behind you." Little Bird was gone, moving to rouse the camp, to get the old and the young moving. "Chaska," Nora said, her teeth beginning to chatter. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. "The hearing, the map." "The hearing will not matter if we are frozen," he said. He grabbed the reins of her mare. "We must go." They rode for an hour, the snow turning from a magical drift into a blinding horizontal curtain of white. The wind howled, a rising, mad scream. Nora could not see the horse in front of her. She could only follow the dark shape of Chaska, who was following the instincts of Little Bird somewhere ahead. This was not a storm. It was a war. The wind tried to peel her from the saddle. The snow tried to blind her. She was so cold, she had stopped shivering and had become a single, numb block of ice. "I cannot," she shouted into the wind, but the wind ate her words. Then Chaska stopped. He was off his horse. He was lifting her down. "Where?" she tried to ask. "Here," he yelled, his mouth next to her ear. "The spring!" He half dragged, half carried her through a narrow fissure in a rock wall, a place she would never have seen. The wind noise was cut off instantly, but it was replaced by a new sound, a low, gurgling rumble, and a smell, sulfur. She stumbled into a vast, dark, open cavern. A dome of rock protected them from the snow, but a large opening in the ceiling let the flakes drift down. And in the center, steam. It rose in thick, white, ghostly plumes from a wide, deep pool of black water. "A hot spring," Chaska said, his voice echoing in the sudden, vast silence. Little Bird was already there. Her horse and several others tethered at the far end, drinking from a runoff trough. The air was warm. Not just warm, it was hot. "We must get you warm," Little Bird said, her voice practical. She was already pulling the frozen, ice-caked saddle from Nora's mare. Both of you. Your clothes are frozen. You will die if you keep them on." Nora looked at Chaska. He was already shrugging out of his sodden outer shirt, his back to her. Little Bird was disappearing into a smaller alcove with a bundle. It is a sacred place," Chaska said, his voice tight. We do not, but the snow, it is a matter of life." He turned to her. His chest was bare. He was all lean muscle and old, faded scars. He was not looking at her body. He was looking at her face. "You are safe here, Nora." The steam rose around them, clinging to their clothes, melting the ice. The only light came from the hole in the roof, the moonlight reflecting off the falling snow, and the low, red glow of the pool itself. Nora, her fingers so numb she could barely move them, fumbled with the buttons of her coat. She was shaking again, a violent, uncontrollable shivering. Chaska stepped toward her. He did not touch her. He just stood in front of her. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. His hands, which were large and rough, were surprisingly gentle. He unfastened the buttons. He slid the heavy, frozen sheepskin coat from her shoulders. Then he unfastened the buttons of the flannel shirt, his fingers moving with a slow, deliberate respect. He kept his eyes on her face, or on the buttons. He pulled the shirt away, and the thin chemise underneath was soaked and transparent. She crossed her arms, a reflex of modesty. He looked away, turning to the pool. "The water, it will warm you." He stepped to the edge and slid in. The water came up to his waist. He did not flinch, but a long, low sigh of relief escaped him. He turned back to her. "Come," he said, holding out a hand. Nora looked at the water. She looked at him. She was a virgin from Boston, promised to one man, now standing half-naked in a cave with another. A man she had known for 3 days. A man who had saved her life 4 times. She thought, with a strange, dizzying clarity, a Lakota took the wrong train and met the virgin mail-order bride who changed his life. Or perhaps, she thought, as she let her own soaked chemise fall to the ground, he had changed hers. She stepped into the water. It was hot, a shocking, blissful heat that felt like life itself. It stung her blistered hands and her cut shoulder, but then it soothed them. The water was black and silky. She waded in, the water rising to cover her breasts, and stood opposite him, the steam swirling between them. She was no longer cold. She was warm, from the outside in and from the inside out. He had not moved. He just watched her face. "You are safe," he said again. "I know," she whispered. They stood in silence, the only sound the gurgle of the spring and the faint, hissing whisper of the snow falling on the hot rocks at the pool's edge. I should wash," she said, her voice uncertain. She indicated her face, her hair, which was full of mud and soot from the fire. He nodded. Yes. He scooped up water in his hands and let it run over his own face, washing away the grime of the fight. Nora did the same, the mineral water feeling slick and clean. She scrubbed at her hands, her arms. The heat was making her dizzy. "Your shoulder," he said, his voice low. She looked. The bandage Rosa had tied was gone, lost in the escape. The wound was an angry red. "Let me," he said. He moved closer, the water swirling around his waist. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He gently took her arm and looked at the wound. He dipped his hands in the water and let the hot, clean stream run over the cut, washing it free of dirt. His touch was clinical, respectful, but it was still a touch. Nora's breath hitched. Chaska heard it. He stopped. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. They were inches apart. The steam was a veil, but it could not hide the look in his eyes. It was not lust. It was wonder. "Nora," he whispered, as if it was the first time he was truly saying her name. She did not pull away. She did not cover herself. She just looked at him. He raised his hand, not his rough hand, but the back of his fingers, and he touched her cheek. His fingers were wet and hot. "Your skin," he said, his voice rough, "it is like fire and snow." And then he kissed her. It was not the kiss of a brute or a conqueror. It was not the kiss Walt Kearney would have given. It was a kiss of utter, breathtaking reverence. His lips were soft, warm from the water, and they touched hers as gently as the snow falling outside. It was a question. Nora answered. She raised her own hands, her blistered, aching hands, and placed them on his bare, wet shoulders. She leaned into him, and she kissed him back. The kiss deepened. It was still gentle, but it was no longer a question. It was a promise. It was the heat of the spring and the cold of the snow. It was Boston and the plains. It was two worlds, two souls, two people who had been running and had finally found a place to stand still. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer, and she put her arms around his neck. They were skin to skin in the hot, dark water. Her mind screamed at the impropriety, at the sin, at the ruin. But her heart, her body, they knew this was not ruin. This was rescue. This was life. She felt the heavy, painful guilt he carried, the weight of his brother's ashes, the shame of his scout days, and she felt him feel her fear, her loss, her desperate fight for honor. And in that embrace, in the hot, healing water, those burdens seemed to float away, carried off by the steam. He rested his forehead against hers. They were both breathing hard. "Nora Whitfield," he murmured. I think my train was the right one after all." "After this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "After we are safe, after the hearing, after justice." "Yes," he said, "after justice." You must ask my hand," she said, the Boston girl rising for a moment. He smiled. He kissed her forehead. "I will, before your elder, the one in the black dress, the judge." "And you," she said, "must ask me before your elders." "Yes," he said, his voice full of an emotion she had never heard. "I will ask you, and we will be married by the stream and by the law, by both." He kissed her again, gently. Then he pulled back. He took her bandaged hands in his. "We should sleep. The morning will be hard." Little Bird had left dry blankets in the alcove. Chaska pulled Nora from the water, wrapping her in a thick, warm buffalo robe. He wrapped one around himself. They did not sleep apart. He sat against the warm rock wall, and she curled up against his chest, her head on his shoulder, his arms securely around her. They were both exhausted. They were both clean. And for the first time, in all this, they were both, in a strange, impossible way, home. Morning came, gray and cold. The snow had stopped, but it lay a foot deep, blanketing the world in a pristine, deadly white. The wind had died. Nora woke first. She was still in his arms. He was asleep, his face in rest, looking younger, the harsh lines of pain and duty smoothed away. She slipped from his embrace, wrapping the robe tighter. She moved to the mouth of the cave. The world was transformed. It was beautiful. "It is a good sign." Chaska was awake. He was standing behind her, wrapped in his own blanket. "The snow," he said, pointing. "It covers our tracks, but it also shows us new ones." He was looking at the back wall of the cave, a place they had not seen in the darkness. The rising sun, reflecting off the snow outside, was sending a single, bright beam of light into the cavern. It illuminated the wall. Nora gasped. The wall was covered in carvings, ancient, deep carvings, and in the very center, struck by that single beam of light, was a symbol, larger and more intricate than the one on her map, but unmistakably the same. A circle, a triangle pointing up, Maniwikoni. But this was more. It was a map, carved in the rock. It showed the basin, the streams, the springs, all of it. It was the original. The elders, they spoke of this, Chaska said, his voice full of awe. The Wintercount Cave, the place where the water law was first written. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a new, fierce hope. This, Nora, this is not just a map. This is our proof. This is the law. The ride back to Cheyenne was a journey between worlds. They were 4 days late for Chaska's train north, and 3 days early for the federal hearing that would decide their lives. The snow from the high country had melted on the plains, turning the roads into a thick, clinging mud. They did not ride into town as fugitives. They rode as a delegation. Chaska, Nora, and Little Bird were at the front. Behind them rode the 3 Lakota elders, their face severe and proud, their presence a statement of law that predated the town itself. And bringing up the rear, his face grim and his repeating rifle resting across his saddle, was old Tom Brennan. With him, riding side saddle with a large medical bag, was Rosa Martinez. They had not been asked. They had simply come. It was market day. Cheyenne was crowded. The main street a sea of wagons, livestock, and citizens, farmers, miners, merchants, and their wives filled the boardwalks, their voices a low hum of commerce. When the delegation appeared at the end of the street, the hum died. People stopped. They stared. They saw the Lakota elders, a sight rarely seen in the town center. They saw Chaska, the Indian from the wanted posters, riding tall and free. And they saw Nora Whitfield, the kidnapped mail-order bride, riding beside him, not in chains, but in a man's trousers, her face smudged with trail dust and set with a resolve that was harder than steel. "That is her," a woman whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden, vast silence. "And that is the Indian," a man muttered. "There should be a reward." "Look," another said, pointing. "Old Tom Brennan. He is with them." This fact gave the crowd pause. Old Tom was a known quantity. He was honest. His presence meant this was not a simple matter of crime. It was something else. They saw Elias Grant standing by the steps of the town's small courthouse, which was just a wooden building next to the land registry office. He was pale, but he nodded to them, his hand gripping a large, square satchel. "Judge Hayes is waiting," Elias called out, his voice thin but clear. "He is in his chambers." The group dismounted. A small, quiet island in a sea of hostile and curious eyes. They started to walk, a unified body, toward the courthouse steps. And then Silas Crowley made his move. The first shot was not an explosion. It was a sharp, flat crack, like a mule driver's whip. It came from the roof of the Mercantile, the very one that should have belonged to Abram Reed. A man in the crowd, a farmer buying seed, clutched his chest and fell, his face a mask of surprise. Then the world exploded. It was not a fight. It was a massacre. 2 more shots from the roof. A woman screamed, clutching her arm. Another man yelled from a high window, "Get the Indian, get the map. $500 for the map." Crowley had turned the town on itself. He had not just hired gunmen. He had activated the town's greed. The reward. People who had been neighbors a moment before were now a panicked, screaming mob. Men who had been at the saloon, already half drunk, pulled their own pistols, not knowing who to shoot, just wanting the money. It was chaos. Horses reared, screaming, overturning a wagon full of chickens. "It is an ambush," old Tom roared, pulling his rifle free. "Get the elders inside," Chaska yelled at Elias. He grabbed Nora's arm. "Stay with them." "No!" she screamed back over the noise, her face white but furious. She looked at the chaos, at the innocent people being trampled. This was not a fight she could run from. She saw a horse, its reins broken, rearing in terror near the church. She broke free from Chaska's grasp. She ran, dodging a falling barrel, and grabbed the horse's reins. With a strength she did not know she possessed, she pulled its head down, speaking to it, her voice a low, urgent command. The horse, sensing her lack of fear, quieted. She grabbed the saddle horn and vaulted into the saddle. She was not a Boston lady. She was a woman from the plains. "To the church!" she screamed, her voice soaring over the panic. "Safety! Get to the church!" She kicked the horse and rode it straight at the small, white building. She was a target, a clear, moving target. But she did not care. She jumped from the saddle, ran up the steps, and grabbed the thick bell rope. The clang of the church bell was a sharp, frantic, commanding sound. Clang, clang, clang. It was not a call to prayer. It was an alarm. It was a signal. It cut through the gunfire, a sound of order in the madness. And people, in their animal panic, began to move toward it. They ran for the sanctuary she had offered. Chaska had watched her for one heart-stopping second, his soul torn between terror for her and a fierce, burning pride. He saw her make it to the church. He turned his attention to the rooftops. The gunmen were on the mercantile and on the saloon. He pointed. "Little bird, the saloon keep them busy." His cousin did not hesitate. She knocked an arrow to her bow. She was not a gunman. She was a hunter. She moved into an alley, a shadow. Her target, the men on the saloon roof. Chaska went for the mercantile. He did not go up the front. He ran into the alley beside it. He saw the wooden supports for the false front, the high back of the building. He jumped, caught a beam, and pulled himself up. He moved with a speed and silence that was inhuman. He was on the roof in seconds. 2 men were there. They were hired guns, laughing as they fired into the street below. "It is like shooting fish in a barrel," one of them said. They did not hear Chaska. He hit the first man from behind, his knife arm a blur. It was not a kill. It was a strike to the kidney, a disabling, agonizing blow. The man crumpled. The second man turned, his eyes wide, fumbling his rifle. Chaska did not wait. He closed the distance. The fight was short, brutal, and ugly. It was fists and knees, and finally, the heavy weight of a chimney stack. Chaska left the man unconscious, his rifle broken. He looked down. The street was still madness. He saw old Tom Brennan, his rifle barking, providing cover for Elias, who was helping the Lakota elders and Rosa get an old woman out of the street. Sheriff Pike was there. He was not stopping the fight. He was in it. He was crouched behind a water trough, his pistol out, his face pale with sweat. He was not a lawman. He was just one of Crowley's guns. Pike saw old Tom. He saw the old rancher, a man he had known for 20 years, a man who represented the old, honest Wyoming he was betraying, and he saw Tom as a threat. "Brennan," Pike yelled, "put the gun down." "You first, you bastard!" Tom yelled back, firing at a gunman in a window. "You sold us out. Pike!" Pike panicked. He stood, his face a mask of terror and rage. And as old Tom turned to reload, Pike shot him. He shot the old man in the back. Tom cried out, a sound of surprise, and pitched forward into the mud. "No!" Rosa screamed. She ran from the cover of the courthouse, her medical bag bumping against her hip. "Rosa, stay back!" Chaska yelled from the roof. But she ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside Tom, in the middle of the street, the bullets still flying. She rolled him over. Blood was everywhere. A bright, pulsing, arterial red. He was dying. He was bleeding out in seconds. Rosa did not pray. She worked. She ripped his shirt open. She saw the wound, the exit wound, an artery, with a practiced, desperate hand. She plunged her fingers into the wound, seeking the source. She found it. She pinched the severed artery between her thumb and forefinger. The pulsing stopped. She looked up, her face a mask of bloody concentration. "I need my bag," she screamed. From the courthouse steps, Elias Grant made his move. He saw the fight stall. He saw Pike, horrified at what he had done. He saw the crowd, now huddled near the church, watching. Elias ran from the courthouse, but not to Rosa. He ran to the town bulletin board, which stood in the center of the street. In his hand, he held his satchel and a bucket of wet, sloppy paste. "What is he doing?" someone whispered. When he reached the board, he did not post a notice. He pulled out 2 large, glossy, photographic prints, still wet from his chemicals. He had taken them 3 days ago, from a hidden wagon. He slapped them onto the board and smeared them with paste. The first photo showed Sheriff Pike in a back room, taking a thick stack of money from Silas Crowley. The second photo showed Deacon Abel, his hand on a Bible, his other hand taking a deed, while Crowley smiled. The gunfire had almost stopped. The only sounds were the church bell, which Nora had not stopped ringing, and the moans of the wounded. People crept out from their hiding places. They moved, as one, toward the bulletin board. They saw the pictures. They saw the proof. "He sold us out," a man said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The deacon, too," a woman spat, "and for our water." The crowd, which had been a panicked mob, was now becoming something else. It was becoming an army. The hired gunmen. Seeing the tide turn, seeing the faces of the citizens change from fear to rage, began to slip away, fading back into the alleys. Their fight over. Chaska dropped from the roof. He landed in the mud, light as a cat, directly in front of Sheriff Pike. Pike was staring at the photos, his face ashen. He looked at Chaska, and his hand fumbled to reload his empty pistol. It is not. It is a lie." Chaska advanced on him, his knife in his hand. This was the man who had shot an old man in the back. This was the man who had tried to sell Nora. This was the man who had served the snake. All the rage, all the pain of his brother's death, of his own lost years, focused on this one. Pathetic, trembling man. He could end him. One blow. He raised the knife. "Chaska, wait!" It was Nora. She was running from the church, her face streaked with soot. Chaska paused. He looked at her. He looked at the crowd. They were watching. He looked at the elders, who were standing on the courthouse steps. He looked down at Pike, who was weeping, a broken, terrified shell of a man. He remembered her words in the ditch. "Do not let him make you a killer." He sheathed his knife. Then, with all his strength, he drove his fist into Pike's jaw. It was a solid, satisfying crack. The sheriff went down, unconscious, his face in the mud he had helped create. Justice, not revenge. The street was silent. Nora ran to him, stopping just short, her hands hovering. "Are you—" He just looked at her, his breathing hard. "This," Nora whispered, looking at the wounded, at the body of the dead farmer. "This blood, it is because of me. I came back." Chaska took her blistered, burned hands. He held them, his grip firm, his voice clear, for all the crowd to hear. "No," he said. "The violence was already here. It was hiding in their bank books and in their back rooms. The violence came for the water. It came for the land." He looked at her, his eyes full of a fire that was not hate, but love. "It did not come for you. You just brought the light." The doors of the courthouse opened. A man in a black frock coat, a federal marshal at his side, stepped out. His face was like carved granite. Judge William T. Hayes. He surveyed the scene. He saw the dead farmer. He saw Rosa, still on her knees, her fingers pinching Tom's life in place. He saw the photos. He saw the unconscious sheriff. "Marshal," the judge said, his voice like ice. "Arrest that man." He pointed to Pike. "Place him in the federal jail, and bring that bulletin board to my chambers. It is evidence." He looked at the crowd. "This hearing will not wait. The injunction on the Sweetwater Basin is in effect immediately. There will be a public hearing, not in a stuffy room, but here, in the street, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Let all of Cheyenne see the truth." The crowd was silent, a murmur of agreement. As the judge turned to go back inside, a voice was heard, cold and clear, from the balcony of the Land Registry Office. Silas Crowley. He stood there, immaculate in his suit, a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked down at the scene, at Chaska and Nora, who stood together, united, in the mud. A beautiful day for justice. "Judge," Crowley called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He looked directly at Chaska. "Enjoy your evening. You and the lady. It will be your last." He raised his glass in a mock toast, then turned and disappeared inside. The threat hung in the cold, wet air, heavier than any storm. The morning of the 7th day rose cold and clear. The mud from the previous day's chaos had begun to dry, but the street still bore the scars of the fight: overturned wagons, dark stains, and the smashed windows of the land office. Judge William T. Hayes did not convene his court inside. He had his marshal place a simple wooden table and 3 chairs on the steps of the courthouse, facing the entire town. Beside the table, on an easel, was the bulletin board with Elias Grant's damning photographs, visible to all. The town gathered. They were not a mob this time. They were quiet, watchful, their faces grim. They had come to see justice, or what passed for it in Wyoming. The farmers, the merchants, the women from the church, they all stood together. On the other side of the street, a delegation from Red Willow, led by the elders, stood in silent dignity. Old Tom Brennan was not there. He was in Rosa's care, in a room at the hotel, alive by the grace of her steady hands. Silas Crowley stood on the balcony of his office, watching the proceedings as if it were theater. He had not been arrested. He was too powerful, his connections too deep. He smiled, a picture of confident wealth. Judge Hayes struck the table with a gavel. "This federal hearing is now in session." His voice boomed. "We are here to rule on an injunction regarding the Sweetwater Basin. I will hear testimony." He did not call the powerful. He called the broken. "I call Miss Nora Whitfield." Nora walked from the crowd. She was not the same woman who had arrived a week ago. Her dress was gone, replaced by the clean trousers and shirt Rosa had given her. Her hands were bandaged. Her hair was pulled back, practical and severe. She stood before the judge, her back straight, and she did not tremble. "Miss Whitfield," the judge said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "please tell this court your story." She did not weep. She did not falter. Her voice was clear and carried in the cold air. She told them of Boston, of her hopes for a school. She held up the crumpled, tear-stained letter from Abram Reed. "This was my contract," she said, her voice ringing with a cold anger. "A promise of a new life, but when I arrived, Sheriff Pike informed me my fiancé was dead." She pointed to the picture of Pike. "He then offered to find me a new sponsor, a benefactor, Mr. Silas Crowley." A low, angry murmur went through the crowd. "I found that Mr. Reed had not died of a fever," Nora continued. "He was murdered because he would not sell his land, because he would not sell this." From her pocket, she produced the small, oilcloth fragment, his map. Then she unfastened her carpet bag and held it up. "And this, his proof. He did not trust the mail. He did not trust the banks. He hid his most precious possession with the one person he thought no one would suspect, his mail-order bride." She showed them the patch, the canvas square with the red, embroidered symbol. "He sent me his treasure, and Silas Crowley tried to claim me, and it as property." She finished and stood back, her testimony a single, perfect, unassailable truth. "I call Chaska," the judge said. Chaska stepped forward. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the elders. He looked at the town. "I am Chaska, son of Spotted Elk," he said. He spoke in English, his voice deep and steady. "My people have lived on this land since the first sun. We do not own it, we belong to it, and we know its laws." He unrolled a large piece of canvas. On it, drawn with charcoal, was a perfect, detailed copy of the map carved into the cave wall. "This is the law of the Sweetwater Basin," he said, his voice rising, full of a power the crowd had never heard. "This is Mini-Wee-Coney. Water is life. It is a sacred map, left by our grandfathers. It shows the veins of the earth, the springs that feed this entire land, the springs that feed Red Willow, and the springs that feed the ranches, and the springs that feed this very town." He looked directly at Silas Crowley, who had stopped smiling. "You call this land empty," Chaska said. "You say it is yours to take, but this map proves your law and our law are the same. This map, and Abram Reed's map, show the basin is on land protected by the Fort Laramie Treaty." "That treaty is a joke," a voice yelled from the back. "It is a federal document," Judge Hayes roared, slamming his gavel, "and this court will honor it." "I call Ellis Grant." Elias stepped up, his photographs formally entered into evidence. "I call Rosa Martinez." Rosa, her hands still stained with Tom's blood, stepped forward. "I am a healer," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "And I am a witness. I saw the fire at Red Willow. It was set by that man." She pointed at the balcony. "His man, Walt Kearney. I saw him, and I saw this fire set to drive the Lakota from their land, so you could steal it before this hearing." "That is a lie," Crowley roared from his balcony. "Is it?" Rosa cried. "And I saw Sheriff Pike shoot an unarmed, 70-year-old man in the back, in this very street. For what? For justice? No. For greed. For your greed." The crowd was vibrating. The truth was out, a raw, bleeding thing in the center of the street. Judge Hayes stood. "Mr. Silas Crowley, step down. You are ordered to testify." Crowley laughed. It was a terrible, sharp sound. "I am not, Judge. This farce is over." He stepped back. Two of his hired gunmen emerged, and they had a hostage. They dragged her forward, a knife to her throat, her hands bound. It was Little Bird. Chaska let out a sound, a low, animal growl. He started forward. "Stay," Crowley commanded, his voice a whip. "Stay, or she dies, and her death will be on your head. Scout." The street was frozen. The judge was powerless. His one marshal was outnumbered. "What do you want, Crowley?" Judge Hayes asked, his voice shaking with rage. "Justice," Crowley's sneer. "My justice, the girl, Little Bird, is my insurance. I want the Indian, and I want the bride, and I want all the maps, the ones from the cave, the ones from the bag, all of B. You will give them to me. You will recant your testimony. You will say you lied." "Never," Chaska spat. "Then she dies," Crowley said, and nodded to his man. The knife pressed closer. "Wait!" Nora screamed. She held up the maps. "We will go." "No, Nora," Chaska said, his eyes locked on his cousin. "We will go," she repeated, her voice firm. "We will trade us for her, but not here. At the basin. We will take you there. We will show you the spring." Crowley's eyes lit up with greed. To have the maps, and the source itself. A fine idea, Miss Whitfield, an excellent trade. He looked at the crowd. "Walt, you are up." From the saloon, a broken, limping, but still living Walt Kearney emerged. His face was a mask of bruises, his arm in a sling, but his good hand held a pistol. His eyes were pure poison, and they were fixed on Chaska. "The four of us," Crowley announced. "We will ride to the basin to finalize this negotiation. My men will stay here if there is any trouble, Annie, my men have their orders. They will burn this town, starting with the federal courthouse and your beloved Red Willow." He was not lying. Chaska looked at Nora. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fire. She was not offering a trade. She was offering a battlefield. He nodded. Once. The ride to the Sweetwater Basin was silent and cold. Crowley, Chaska, Nora, and Kearney, a federal deputy, a young man who had been disgusted by Pike, followed at a distance, unnoticed. The basin was a wide, rocky depression, dry as a bone. In the center was a small, crude dam, built of rocks and timber by Crowley's surveyors. It blocked what looked like a small, insignificant trickle. "This is your mighty river," Crowley mocked. "This is a dry wash." "The water is under the rock," Chaska said, his voice quiet. He was scanning the rocks, the angles. "Show me," Crowley ordered, gesturing with his pistol. "Walt," Crowley said, his voice slick. "The Indian is yours. Do what you want with him. Just get the maps first." Kearney smiled, his teeth broken. "With pleasure." He limped toward Chaska, his pistol raised. "This time, Indian, this time, I will not." Kearney never finished. Chaska moved. He did not go for the gun. He kicked Kearney's broken foot. Kearney screamed. A high, thin sound, and the pistol fired, the shot going wild. Chaska was on him. It was not a fight. It was an execution. But it was Kearney who had brought the hate. Chaska was just a force of nature. He used the man's own momentum, his own rage, against him. The fight was over in 5 seconds. Chaska's knife at Kearney's throat. Kearney was sobbing, defeated, his last pathetic rage spent. Chaska looked at the man, a thing of pure poison, and let him go. He threw him, whimpering, to the ground. At the same moment, Crowley, stunned by the speed, turned his pistol on Chaska. "No!" Nora screamed. But she was not screaming at Crowley. She was running. She ran past them, toward the crude dam. She had seen a surveyor's axe, left by the crew. "Nora, stop!" Crowley yelled, turning his aim to her. She grabbed the axe. She was not a Boston lady. She was a woman of the plains. She was a woman in love. And she was a woman of rage. She swung the axe, not at a man, at the dam. She slammed the heavy blade into the thick hemp rope that held the timbers together. The rope snapped. Crowley fired. The shot went wide. For a second, nothing happened. The dam held. Then, with a low, groaning sound, the earth seemed to split. The timbers gave way. It was not a trickle. A column of water, a pillar of pure, white, gushing life, erupted from the ground. It was the spring, the Mani Wiconi. It burst from the rocks with a roar, a living testament, a force that had been held back for 1,000 years. It was the living proof. Crowley stared, his face a mask of disbelief, his life's work, his empire, washed away in a flood of truth. He turned, his face a new, terrible mask of pure hate. He raised his pistol, aimed it straight at Nora's heart. A shot echoed through the basin. Silas Crowley did not fire. He looked down at his chest, at the small, red hole that had appeared. He looked up, his expression one of pure surprise. He fell, dead, his body washing into the water he had tried to steal. Chaska and Nora stood frozen. The deputy sheriff, the young, quiet one, walked forward, his pistol still smoking. He was going to shoot her. The deputy stammered, looking at his own hands. I could not let him. After Pike, after all this. He looked at Chaska. "It is over, Mr. Chaska. It is finally over." Back in town, the news arrived with the deputy's horse. The crowd, which had been held hostage, erupted. Crowley's men, leaderless, threw down their guns. Judge Hayes reconvened his court. Silas Crowley is deceased. The judge announced, Sheriff Pike is in federal custody. Walt Kearney is in custody. This court finds that the evidence is overwhelming. He looked at the Lakota elders. He looked at the townspeople. By the power of the United States federal court and by the ancient laws of this land, he declared, the Sweetwater Basin is hereby protected. A water management decree is established. A board will be formed. Half the seats will be held by the town of Cheyenne. Half the seats will be held by the council of Red Willow. The water will be shared. The law is final. A roar went up from the crowd, a sound of release, of disbelief, of hope. In the middle of the celebration, Chaska stood alone. He saw Little Bird, safe, embraced by her family. He had done it. He had protected his cousin. He had saved his people's water. A tremor started in his hands. He looked at them. He had killed no one, but he had been willing to. He had been so close. The violence of his past, the rage, it had almost taken him. He began to shake, a deep, uncontrollable reaction to the death he had faced, the death he had almost dealt, and the love he had almost lost. He did not know she was there until she touched him. Nora. She did not speak. She saw him, shaking, his face pale. She ignored the cheering crowd. She ignored the judge. She ignored the world. She stepped in front of him, and in the middle of the street, in front of God and the entire town, she wrapped her arms around him. She held him, her bandaged hands on his back, her face pressed against his chest. She held him as he had held her. Chaska's arms came up, slowly, and he held her. He buried his face in her hair, smelling the smoke, the water, the wind. He held on to her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had just been washed clean. The water was flowing in the Sweetwater Basin. The blood was washing from the stones. And in the wind, for the first time in a very long time, there was the smell of new, clean grass. The town buried its dead, and in doing so, buried its old self. The farmer who fell in the street was given a funeral in the same church Nora had used as a sanctuary. The whole town attended, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Lakota elders. Deacon Abel was gone, recalled in disgrace by his church. Sheriff Pike was in a federal prison, awaiting a trial he would not win. The air in Cheyenne, once thick with greed and smoke, felt cleaner. Old Tom Brennan did not die. He lay in a clean room at the hotel, nursed by Rosa Martinez. His Irish constitution, he claimed, was too stubborn, but he knew the truth. He owed his life to her. You have a gift, lass, he whispered, his voice reedy, as she changed his bandages. It is just knowledge. Tom, Rosa said, her hands gentle. Knowledge that is not shared is just a secret, he argued. We need you here, the town. It needs a healer, a real one. And so, with a small fund started by Judge Hayes, Rosa's clinic was born. It was not in a fancy office. It was in a small, clean building, and on the sign, she painted a handshake, a brown hand and a white one. Her first patient was a Lakota child with a fever. Her second was the wife of the town's new, non-corrupt marshal. The legal aftermath was swift. Elias Grant's articles, telegraphed to papers in Laramie and Denver, had made Cheyenne a national story. He did not write it as a sensational Western gunfight. He wrote it as a story of corporate greed and a conspiracy of land and water theft, backed by photography. Silas Crowley's assets, his land office, his bank accounts, his half-built dam, were seized by the federal government. Judge Hayes did not just auction them off. He created a community water trust, the first act of the new Joint Water Board with seats held by Little Bird and an elder from Red Willow. And by Tom Brennan and Elias Grant from the town was to fund the new school. It was not a proper schoolhouse. Not yet. It was a winter school, held in the town's main hall, which was now warm and bright. Nora was its first and only teacher, but she was not alone. On the first day, 20 children came. 10 were white. children of ranchers and merchants. 10 were Lakota, having ridden in from Red Willow. They stared at each other across a room that was as wide as a continent. Nora stood at the front, her hands clasped. She had a new dress, a simple, practical one. But her courage failed her. She did not know how to begin. Little Bird, who had been standing at the back, walked to the front. She did not speak. She simply raised her hand. In the universal sign language of the plains, she signed, "We are here, together." A Lakota boy smiled. A white girl, daughter of a rancher, shyly imitated the sign. Nora found her voice. "Good morning," she said. And then she looked at Little Bird, who provided the word. Hihani waf. The school was bilingual. They learned the alphabet, and they learned the signs. They read from Nora's worn book of poems, and they heard the Lakota legends of the wind, told by an elder who came in once a week. They were learning not just words, but each other's worlds. 2 weeks passed. The new community was healing, the wounds of the street fight turning to scars. But Chaska had a wound that had not healed. He stood on the ridge overlooking Cheyenne, the deerskin pouch in his hand. He had waited. He had ensured his cousin was safe, that the water was safe. But his brother was still waiting. He felt her presence before he saw her. Nora walked up the hill, not making a sound. The plains had taught her to walk quietly. "It is time," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. She was carrying a small bundle of her own, bread, cheese, and a blanket. "I must do this alone, Nora." "I know," she said, her voice soft. "You must, but I am coming with you. You will not be alone." He looked at her steady, blue eyes, at the woman who had faced guns and fire and scandal. He saw no fear in her. He saw no doubt. He saw only love, a love as wide and quiet as the plains. He nodded. They rode north, not to Red Willow, but further, higher, onto the great, open, untouched prairie that was his brother's home. They rode for a full day, until the last traces of Cheyenne were a forgotten memory. There, under a sky so vast it humbled the soul. He dismounted. He stood on a low hill, the wind his only companion. It was the same wind he had remembered in Laramie, the one his elder had spoken of. But it no longer smelled of coal. It smelled of sage and dry grass and freedom. He opened the pouch. Nora stayed back, by the horses, giving him his space. She watched him. He was a man of 2 worlds, but in this moment, he was whole. Chaska did not say a prayer in English. He spoke to the wind, in the soft, flowing words of his people. He told his brother he was sorry. Sorry he was late. Sorry he had not been there. He told him he was free. He told him the water was safe. He told him he was home. He held the pouch open, and the wind, the strong, clean wind of the high plains, did the rest. It took the ashes and lifted them, a small, gray swirl against the infinite blue. It carried them east, toward the rising sun. Chaska stood for a long time, his face to the wind, his eyes closed. When he opened them, the guilt was gone. He had been a scout. He had been a man of vengeance. He had been a man lost on a train. Now, he was just Chaska. He was the guardian of the water, and he was free. Nora watched the tears track through the dust on his cheeks. She did not move to comfort him. She knew this was a grief he had to walk through to its end. When he finally turned, his face was calm. He had let his brother go. She walked to him. She did not say a word. She just took his hand. He laced his fingers with hers, her bandaged, scarred hand, and his. They stood together, 2 small, human figures in a vast, holy landscape. Nora looked at the sky. She thought of Boston, of the whispers, the fear of ruin, of being a fallen woman. She had run from a man at the rail yard. She had stood, half naked, with another in a sacred spring. She had held a dying man in the street. She had been arrested, and she had been a witness, and she had never, in her entire, proper, 19 years of life, felt so honorable. She was not ruined, she was forged. They rode back to Red Willow. Chaska did not go to their small cabin. He went to the council lodge. Nora waited outside. He was in there for an hour. When he came out, the oldest elder came with him. The elder walked straight to Nora. He looked at her, his eyes holding the wisdom of 1,000 years. He did not speak. He simply placed his hand on her head, a blessing. Then he nodded to Chaska and went back inside. "What did you do?" Nora asked. "I asked for permission," Chaska said, a small, rare smile touching his lips. "To marry you, to bring a wife into our lands. He said you were already a daughter of the Red Willow. He said you were a woman who saves children from fire." He said yes. Nora's heart felt too big for her chest. "Oh, Chaska!" "But," he said, taking her hand, "that is only half." They rode to Cheyenne. They did not go to the church. They walked, hand in hand, up the steps of the courthouse, where Judge Hayes was taking his lunch. "Judge," Chaska said, standing in the doorway, "we need to get married." The judge put down his sandwich. He looked at the Lakota warrior and the former mail-order bride, their hands clasped, their faces set. He had seen a lot of things. This, he thought, was the best of them. "Well," the judge said, wiping his mouth, "it seems this court's business is not yet concluded." They were married on the courthouse steps, the same place the hearing had been held. It was not a private affair. The town came, the ranchers, the merchants. Elias Grant was his best man. Rosa and Little Bird stood with Nora. The Lakota elders came and stood in the front row. Judge Hayes read from his book, and when he was done, the oldest elder stepped forward. He said nothing. He just produced a single, white eagle feather. He tied it, with a red sinew, around their joined hands. 2 ceremonies, 2 worlds, 1 vow. When it was done, Chaska turned to Nora, his wife, and he kissed her. The town of Cheyenne did not whisper. They cheered. Old Tom Brennan, his arm in a sling, came forward. "I do not have a proper gift," he rasped. "But I have an old line cabin up on the high plateau, overlooks the basin. It is small, but it is clean, and the chimney draws. The key is with me, but I think you should have it." That night, they rode, not to a hotel, but to the cabin. It was small, just 1 room, a stone fireplace, a good bed, and a table, but it was theirs. Chaska built a fire, the small room filled with the scent of pine and the flickering, golden light. Nora stood by the window, looking out at the vast, dark land, the stars like diamonds scattered on black velvet. She turned. He was watching her. He had not moved. There was no hurry in him, only a deep, profound, and patient love. "Nora," he said, his voice low. She walked to him. He was her husband. She was his wife. There was no contract, no bargain, no fear of ruin, only this. He touched her face, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. His hands were not the hands of a stranger. They were the hands that had caught her when she fell, the hands that had washed her wound, the hands that had held her in the dark. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. I am new," she whispered. I do not know." "I know," he said. "So am I." He kissed her. It was the kiss from the spring, but deeper. It was a kiss of promise and a kiss of homecoming. He lifted her, his arms strong, and carried her to the simple bed. Their wedding night was not a fire of passion. It was a slow, deep warmth. It was the softness of the wool blankets. It was the sound of the wind outside, and the crackle of the fire inside. It was the whisper of their breath in the quiet dark. It was the gentle, patient, trusting exploration of 2 bodies and 2 souls who had fought for this one, simple, profound moment of peace. It was skin against skin, heart against heart. It was consent. It was safety. It was, after a lifetime of running, a final, perfect stillness. The next morning, Nora awoke in his arms. The sun was streaming through the small window, falling across the wooden floor. She felt complete. Chaska was already awake. He was holding something, a piece of wood, a sturdy post from Tom's old corral. He had been carving it. He showed it to her. Carved deep into the wood was the symbol Many Wiconi. They took it outside. The air was cold, the sun bright. The land fell away before them, a vast, beautiful, scarred, and healing vista. Together, they dug a hole, not with a shovel, but with their hands, in the earth by their front door. They planted the post, they packed the dirt around it. It stood tall, a promise, a marker. "This is our home," Chaska said, his arm around her waist. "Here," Nora said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "By the water, we will guard it." He kissed the top of her head. He had taken the wrong train. He had been lost, and it had led him, finally, to the only place he had ever truly belonged. 1 year later, the land had begun to heal. The black scar from Kearney's fire was now covered in new, green grass. The water from the Sweetwater Basin, now flowing freely, had been channeled into small, smart irrigation ditches, just as the Lakota had always done. The harvest that autumn was the best in the territory's memory. The fields, once parched and brown, were full. Old Tom Brennan, who was now walking with a cane and a permanent, lopsided grin, watched his herd of horses. They had new foals, strong and fast, and the valley was alive with them. The Cheyenne School was the loudest, most chaotic, and most successful building in town. On the wall, Nora had hung a great map. It was a map Elias Grant had helped her commission, drawn by a cartographer in Denver. It showed everything. It showed the steel lines of the railroad, cutting east and west, and it showed the winding, ancient, blue lines of the water, the veins of the earth. On this map, they were not in conflict. They simply coexisted. One new, one ancient, both vital. The children, Lakota and white, were learning to read the map in 2 languages. "This," Nora would say, her hand on the map, her voice clear and steady, "is the first lesson, and it is the only lesson." She would point to the symbol that was now the town's official seal, the one from the cave, the one from her own needlework. Many Wiconi. Water is life. It does not belong to one man. It belongs to all, and we are all its guardians. Chaska had a new name. He was not a scout. He was not a fugitive. He was the warden of the water. It was a title created by the board, by Tom and Elias and Little Bird. He was the mediator, the man who rode between the camps. When a rancher's new ditch took too much, Chaska was the one who came. When a storm broke a dam at Red Willow, he was the one who led the crew to fix it. He was the man in the middle, the man who understood both laws, the man who spoke both languages. He no longer walked with the ghosts of his past. He walked with the purpose of the future. Elias Grant's story, The Battle for Sweetwater, was published in the Harper's Weekly magazine. He had become a famous man, but he did not leave Cheyenne. He had started the town's first real newspaper, the Wyoming Truth Teller. He had written, in his first editorial, that Cheyenne had, by accident and blood, become a rare example of an alliance between the new law of the federal court and the ancient law of the land. It was, he wrote, a fragile, precious, and necessary peace. The threads of their lives had woven together, creating a new, stronger fabric. Little Bird, no longer just a cousin, was now a leader. She had taken the sudden, Eastern interest in the Indians and turned it to her advantage. She had started a craft cooperative, selling the beautiful quill work and beadwork of the Lakota women not for pennies, but for real, hard dollars, funding the Red Willow community. Rosa Martinez was now, officially, Dr. Rosa. After her miracle of saving Tom, the town had raised money to send her to Denver for a winter, to get the formal papers she had never needed. She returned as the town's, and the territory's, official physician and midwife. She was the one who brought new life, from both worlds, into the light. And old Tom Brennan, his fighting days over, had turned his ranch over to a young couple, one of the first graduates of Nora's school, a white boy who knew how to sign, and a Lakota girl who could read Whitman. That autumn, the rainy season came. The town, which had once feared a lack of water, now held its breath, fearing a flood from the new, free-flowing spring. The water in the Sweetwater Basin rose. It rose to the marker Chaska had set. It filled the new channels. It watered the fields. And there, it stopped. It was a perfect, measured abundance. The earth had taken what it needed, and given the rest. The sky, washed clean by the rain, was a high, piercing blue. A flock of wild geese flying south, crossed the sun. They flew in a perfect, unified V, from the porch of the small cabin on the plateau. Chaska and Nora watched them. The cabin was their home, the wooden post they had planted. The Maniwikoni marker was now weathered, a permanent part of the land. "They are flying together," Nora said, her voice quiet. She was leaning against him, her head on his shoulder. "It is the only way to fly," he said. She was fuller than she had been a year ago. Her body was softer, rounded. She took his large, rough hand and placed it on her stomach. He felt it, a small, fluttering movement, like a bird's wing, a new life. Chaska closed his eyes. He had come here, a man carrying the ashes of his past, a man so full of guilt he could not breathe. He had been lost. He had taken the wrong train, to the wrong town, and it had led him to this woman, to this life, to this child, a child who would be born of two worlds, under a sign of water, in a land of peace. He heard the wind. It was the same wind that had called to him his whole life. But today, it did not speak of his brother. It did not speak of his ancestors. It whispered of the future, and he heard it as clearly as he heard Nora's soft breath. The path was not lost. It just found you. He bent his head and kissed her. He kissed his wife. "What will we tell him?" she whispered, her hand over his, on the swell of her belly. Or her... Chaska looked out at the vast, sunlit land. He saw the gleam of the railroad tracks in the far distance, and the new, silver thread of the Sweetwater, running beside it. "We will teach him 2 languages, Chaska said, "and 2 traditions. We will teach him of Boston and of the plains." Nora smiled, her hand turning to clasp his. "And we will teach him," she said. "That honor is not what people say about you. It is what you do when no one is watching. And that justice is not revenge. It is building something that lasts." "Yes," Chaska said, his voice full of a peace that was deeper than any water. "And we will teach him one more thing, that he must have a brave heart." He looked at the sun, which was just now touching the surface of the Sweetwater Basin, turning the water into a sheet of liquid gold. He had been a man on the wrong train, and it had been the right train, the only train, the one that had, after all this time, finally brought him home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and like this video. It also helps a great deal if you can hit the hype button, so this story can be heard by more people.